Chapter 16, The Second Brother's Surprise. However, given the circumstances, Morel could only comfort himself. He noted that both Helbo and Regis seemed to respect the Beggar King greatly. Perhaps this descendant of the Targaryens truly possessed some unique talents. With a sigh, Morel sent his son away and tried to maintain a positive outlook. Viserys was unaware of Morel and his son's reservations. He only knew that this job suited him perfectly. After receiving the map, he went straight to the workshop to study it. The workshop was situated on a hill with a lower elevation to the east and a waterway to the south. The workshop's sewage had turned the waterway murky, but in these medieval times, providing jobs and feeding people took precedence over environmental concerns. Viserys quickly devised a plan for sentry posts and patrol routes. He divided the more than 30 people into 2 groups, with him and Regis each leading a team in 2 shifts. Initially, Morel shared his son's skepticism about Viserys' abilities. But upon seeing Viserys' meticulous arrangements, he felt inexplicably reassured. Despite his lack of understanding in these matters, the professionalism that Viserys exuded instilled a sense of trust. Viserys' constant presence at the various posts and his direct intervention when someone slacked off further solidified this trust. While some were unhappy with his strictness, they dared not express it openly. Most had witnessed him easily overpower Regis with one hand. Rabbi, however, still harbored resentment. Assigned to the day shift by Viserys, he felt insecure during the day and couldn't sleep well at night. A week had passed since Viserys' arrival at the workshop, and things had remained quiet. Viserys also noticed a change in his own physiology. Since his constitution upgrade, his need for sleep had decreased. Now, less than 7 hours of sleep was enough to keep him energized for the day. Burn them all. Burn. Burn. Ah! The orange flames swept through the workshop like a storm, engulfing everything in their path. The roaring inferno drowned out the cries of people and consumed the whale oil along with countless lives. Viserys, who had just fallen asleep, suddenly opened his eyes. The 1,000-degree flames had surrounded his quarters. In his dream, he had seen several figures emerging stealthily from the water, attacking the workshop and causing a massive fire. His dragon dreams had been triggered. Someone had breached his defenses, but his plan was solid. The patrols were designed to respond swiftly, with the ability to gather reinforcements within minutes. Each team member had a specific role, including one dedicated to communications. Unless faced with an army, they should have been able to hold their ground. This breach could only mean 2 things: either someone had slacked off, abandoning their post, or Helbo's rapid expansion had allowed for infiltration by enemy spies. These street thugs were no match for professional soldiers. Viserys had wisely moved the rest area to the south near the ditch, anticipating such a scenario. With no time to call for reinforcements, Viserys decided to take action himself. He quickly donned his leather armor, grabbed his long sword and dagger, and jumped out of the window. His immediate goal was to assess the situation and coordinate the patrol members to get help. At this time, a member of the patrol stood by the waterway, looking left and right. Seeing that the other 2 team members were not far away, he relaxed a little. Suddenly, something felt wrong. He couldn't immediately pinpoint the issue. Wait. The toad isn't croaking. The patrol member immediately became vigilant, recalling Viserys' teachings. Viserys had told them to pay attention to their surroundings while patrolling. Frogs, toads, and crickets, for example, would stop croaking if someone approached. This could help determine the direction and location of an enemy during patrols. The patrol member shouted in a threatening manner toward the waterway, "Who's there? Show yourself." This bluffing tactic was also taught by Viserys. The leader of the intruders was annoyed. Viserys' patrols were too well organized. They had been watching for days but had not found a suitable place to breach. Even the filthy waterway was patrolled. However, since there were fewer patrols here, they decided to attack from this direction. They thought the patrol would be easy to deal with, but the patrolman's vigilance was beyond their expectations. "Who goes there?" The patrolman was flustered when he saw a dozen men appear suddenly, so much so that his voice wavered. In the moonlight, he saw the glint of knives and daggers. He quickly sounded the alarm, but it was already too late. This group had come to set the workshop on fire. Unless he could hold them back, they would cause great damage once inside. The other 2 team members quickly came running after hearing the whistle. But after a few steps, they saw at least 30 people in the shadows. They didn't have the courage to fight off 10 men each, and they immediately thought of running away. The intruders seemed to have the same idea. The leader shouted to his men, "Charge in and burn this place to the ground." "Ooh!" The crowd let out strange cries, like a pack of hyenas closing in on their prey, with some even laughing cruelly. Just when several patrol members were beginning to despair, they suddenly heard a shout from behind, "Go back and get help. Lord Viserys." They were relieved to see Viserys running over but anxious upon realizing he was alone. "Hurry." Without needing further urging, the patrol members sprinted away as fast as they could. Under the crescent moon in the night sky, Viserys didn't have time to question why all three had fled. With the moonlight still relatively bright, he estimated there were about 30 attackers. Although their faces were hidden in the shadows, their figures were clearly visible. Viserys' silver hair made him conspicuous, even more so now. One of the attackers suddenly said, "Isn't this the Beggar King? What are you doing here? Aren't you Targaryens supposed to be proud dragons? Why are you acting like a watchdog?" As soon as he finished speaking, the others burst into laughter. Viserys raised the corner of his mouth and replied, "Your mother didn't want to let me go, so I had to stay in Bravos for a while." Verbal attacks centered on family were always Viserys' favorite. Though he couldn't see the man's face clearly, he sensed the man was taken aback. "You fool. I'll see if your bones are as hard as your mouth. Attack." Several subordinates armed with short knives surrounded Viserys. The sharp blades glistened in the moonlight, looking even more menacing. They gradually approached, their eyes flashing with cruel intent. "This is a descendant of the Targaryens, a genuine noble. They would boast for years about killing such a person." Viserys calmly drew his sword, silently assessing the strength of the men and looking for a position that would be advantageous to him. Chapter 17, Dragon Dreams. Observation. Viserys couldn't recall the name of the person who he had just provoked, but it didn't matter. With lethal precision, he dispatched his enemies. His master-level combat skills allowed him to move with such speed and efficiency that his opponents saw nothing but the cold gleam of his blade. In less than a minute, 6 or 7 men lay dead on the ground. One particularly unfortunate soul had his head severed, the gruesome trophy rolling to the feet of the instigator. This man, a mercenary named Radman, had once been a guest at Viserys' banquet. Radman was a minor leader, hence why Viserys didn't remember him. He had coarse, flaxen hair slicked back in a style reminiscent of a wolf's tail, and a missing right eyebrow from an old arrow wound. He had lost his right forearm in battle 6 months prior, making him unfit for frontline combat, but his experience still made him valuable as a hired hand. Seeing the Beggar King who had sold his mother's crown standing against him and his men, Radman had assumed Viserys was seeking death. He thought a single knife would be enough to turn Viserys into mincemeat, especially since he remembered him as a lightweight from their previous encounter. Radman believed he could easily defeat Viserys in just a few moves, even with his handicap. Reality, however, proved him disastrously wrong. How is this possible? How can he fight so well? Radman's mouth went dry, his saliva stopped flowing, a reaction typical of a rookie soldier facing battle for the first time. He couldn't comprehend how Viserys could be so competent. Viserys moved with astonishing speed, his figure becoming a blur in the darkness. The attackers, armed with short weapons and burdened with firewood, were taken by surprise. They had to cross the waterway, which further hindered their movements. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Radman knew that failure to defeat Viserys meant the failure of their entire operation. He shouted frantically, "Give it everything. Otherwise, none of us will get Lord Anderson's reward." Viserys didn't know who this Anderson was, but he silently noted the name. As a cloud passed over the moon, plunging the area into darkness, Viserys seized the opportunity. He dropped his sword, took out his dagger, and began slitting throats with deadly efficiency. Screams filled the air as Viserys moved like a reaper in the night, his dagger harvesting lives. The attackers, now gripped by terror, swung their knives wildly, even injuring one another in their panic. Suddenly, 2 attackers couldn't bear the tense atmosphere any longer. They threw down their weapons, screamed, and jumped into the murky waterway in a desperate bid to escape. "Don't run. Gather together. Gather together." Radman shouted at the top of his lungs, managing to gather a dozen of his men. But the group's morale quickly melted away like ice under a hot sun as they saw a light approaching from a distance. It was Regis and his team, armed with wooden spears and torches, running at full speed and yelling. The few patrol members Viserys had sent back to deliver the message now had swollen faces, courtesy of Regis. When he heard they had left Viserys alone, he was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat, his hair standing on end. He not only rallied everyone around him but also dragged those who were resting out of bed. Even then, they could only muster fewer than 20 people. Though Regis knew Viserys was very strong, he was still scared that he could handle more than 10 attackers at once. Along the way, Regis kept praying, and when they reached the waterway, they could only judge the general direction of the fight by the sounds of splashing water. As the group got closer, they saw the aftermath, wounded and dead bodies littered the ground, and only a silver-haired youth with a fierce aura stood there. "Lord Viserys?" Regis asked tentatively. Viserys, still radiating murderous intent, turned his head, causing Regis to shudder. "It's me," Viserys said, trying to calm himself. "Are you okay?" Regis asked. "I'm fine. Look around and see if there are any survivors. Deal with them later." Viserys then turned and left. Regis was shocked by the scene before him, the bodies lying on the ground and the ones still groaning in pain. Although he didn't know how many had escaped, he estimated there had been at least 30 attackers. That meant Viserys had single-handedly stopped an attack by 30 men. This realization made Regis gasp in astonishment. All of this was done by Lord Viserys. Regis muttered in disbelief. "Of course, there's only one lord here," one of the other team members said, sharing in the awe. Oh. Many of the team members had never seen such a bloody scene before, and the strong smell of blood caused some to vomit uncontrollably. Regis, snapping out of his shock, yelled at the others, "There are dead bodies here. Hurry up and clean this up." The team members sprang into action, gathering the bodies scattered on the ground. Regis couldn't help but realize that Viserys was far stronger than he had ever imagined. When Viserys had been teaching him sword skills and training methods, Regis had been skeptical. Crawling on the ground and adopting strange stances seemed pointless to him. But now, seeing the aftermath of Viserys' fight, he believed. If he could someday have even half of Viserys' strength, he would consider himself very fortunate. Meanwhile, back in his room, Viserys began to reflect on the recent battle. The victory had been a combination of favorable conditions and good tactics. The attackers were unprepared, his long weapon gave him an advantage, and the environment worked in his favor. However, he knew that if the circumstances had been different, he could have easily been injured, or worse. In this era, injuries were particularly dangerous, especially during the long summer when infections were common. Caution was everything. Viserys opened his panel to check his progress and noticed that his Dragon Dreams skill had improved significantly. Dragon Dreams, ordinary plus in the past 3 months, his proficiency had increased by 20 points. It seemed the skill had just refreshed for the new day. He added the remaining 5 points to Dragon Dreams, and a strange sensation rippled through his mind. Dragon Dreams, proficient plus. For a moment, Viserys felt a clearer perception of future events. Previously, he had only passively perceived impending danger through his dreams. Now, it seemed he could actively predict movements and threats through his dreams. With some time left before dawn, Viserys decided to test his newfound ability. He recalled the recent dream of a black-clad assassin crossing the sea and focused his mind, hoping to see where the man was now. Chapter 18, Brother is Too Cold. Viserys stretched out on the bed, gradually relaxing. The adrenaline from the recent battle still coursed through his veins, making his heart pound and the vivid images of the fight replay in his mind. Sleep didn't come easily. He tossed and turned for nearly half an hour before finally drifting off. In his dream, Viserys found himself on a dark, undulating sea. The sky was lightening, signaling dawn, but the sea remained dark and turbulent, as if recovering from a storm. Pieces of wood and cargo floated around, and a thin, soaking wetman clung to a plank. Is this a storm? Viserys wondered, feeling a sense of unexpected fortune. The assassin sent to kill him had encountered a storm en route, a stroke of luck indeed. The men seemed to have been drifting at sea for days, lying listlessly on the broken plank, like a leaf at the mercy of the waves, ready to capsize at any moment. Suddenly, the assassin sprang to life, his body electrified with energy. Like a predator spotting prey, he lunged forward and caught a 1-meter-long lobster. With practiced ease, he took out a dagger and cleaned the lobster, preparing a fresh meal of sashimi within minutes. This is unbelievable. Viserys thought, incredulous. In his previous life, he had seen movies depicting people adrift at sea, struggling to find food and barely surviving. Yet here was the assassin, thriving in such dire circumstances. But something peculiar caught Viserys' attention. After killing the lobster, the assassin shuddered, as if he had felt the knife's plunge himself. A thought crossed Viserys' mind, could this man be a skin changer, someone with the ability to control animals? Just as Viserys was about to delve deeper into his observation, the scene blurred. He felt dizzy, like he hadn't slept for days. The exhaustion forced him to withdraw from the Dragon Dream state. It seems my magic power is insufficient, Viserys realized. Exiting Dragon Dreams, he noted his magic power was less than 1. He hadn't studied magic for 2 months, leaving his magic power below 10. Passively triggering Dragon Dreams consumed some magic, but like physical strength, it would automatically recover over time. However, there were no shortcuts to increasing his magic except by allocating points. Bravos, with its many shrines, temples, and the House of Black and White, might hold answers. Perhaps he could find a way to enhance his magic there. Suddenly, Viserys heard a thumping sound, like someone pounding on a wooden board. Someone was knocking. He opened his eyes and saw the door had been cracked open, and a bald head pushed in. It was Regis. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Viserys asked, not bothering to get out of bed. "You were sleeping?" Regis asked, somewhat surprised. "I was just falling asleep," Viserys replied. Seeing that Viserys had actually been asleep, Regis was taken aback. He thought to himself, Viserys is incredible. He just killed a dozen people and now he's sleeping. "Oh, I thought you were injured, so I came in to check on you." "Go back to sleep," Regis said. Viserys knew Regis meant no harm, so he remained relaxed. He waved his hand dismissively and turned over to go back to sleep. Regis gently closed the door and stepped back out, the admiration in his eyes deepening. Viserys found the method of tracking through dreams too exhausting. He wanted to continue the dream, but with his magic depleted, he couldn't. He fell asleep almost immediately. He slept until noon the next day, undisturbed. No one dared to interrupt his peaceful slumber. Regis took it upon himself to watch over him. That night, the master of the workshop, Morel, was not present due to other matters. However, he learned of the events shortly before dawn and hurried back. He was relieved to see the workshop undamaged. "Lord Regis, what happened? Was anyone hurt?" Morel asked, concerned. Regis glanced at Morel, impressed that his first concern was for the people rather than the workshop. "The attackers were driven back by us, or rather by Lord Viserys." "Lord Viserys?" Morel repeated, confused, looking at his equally perplexed son. He thought, "Didn't you say dozens of people came last night? Could Viserys have stopped them all by himself?" That half-grown boy. Whether others believed it or not, Morel and his son were skeptical. Either they heard wrong and there weren't dozens of attackers, or something extraordinary had happened. After all, wasn't Regis supposed to be in charge at night? Why did Viserys repel the attackers? Ignoring the father and son's doubts, Regis led them to the room where the attackers were held. Inside, there were 7 or 8 bodies and 4 or 5 injured people lying on the floor. These are all. The sight of such a tragic scene made Morel turn pale. Regis wondered why the usually composed father and son were now stuttering. "These are the attackers. They were all killed by Lord Viserys," Regis said with a hint of pride, as if he had killed them himself. "I'll leave the rest to you. Lord Viserys is still resting, so don't disturb him." Regis then turned to leave. At this moment, Rabbi suddenly remembered something and hurriedly asked, "Is Lord Viserys injured?" "No, he's fine," Regis replied. The father and son were stunned. They couldn't fathom what kind of person they had hired. He had killed a dozen people in one night and emerged unscathed. He was a monster. Rabbi suddenly remembered what a friend of his, a water dancer, had told him. A master swordsman is very sensitive to the reactions of others. They even notice the slightest facial expression. Rabbi realized that his attitude towards Viserys had been disrespectful. He suddenly felt a pang of fear. "Should we prepare some gifts for him?" he suggested to his father. Morel nodded, indicating that he would take care of it. Helbo learned the news a little later. When he discovered that Viserys had killed more than a dozen people on his own, his reaction was even more exaggerated than Morel and his sons. He immediately prepared a banquet to honor Viserys and gathered some gifts. He knew the news would spread quickly. When it did, his own business would benefit, and his influence might even expand further. He absolutely could not let such a valuable asset slip away. As for those who were killed, they were naturally not a problem. It was a serious crime to raid someone's workshop at night. And he wouldn't let Viserys take the blame for all these deaths. He could just pin it on someone else. He had done this many times before. Dany only learned about the incident after hearing Morel's account. While others were shocked and admired Viserys for killing dozens of people, Dany was terrified. Later, when no one was around, she worriedly checked Viserys' body, relieved only when she was certain he wasn't injured. Chapter 19, Plot after plot. The burden of using dragon dreams to perform active divination was not small, and it took until the afternoon for Viserys to recover his energy. As he opened the door, he found Rabbi waiting outside. The enthusiasm in his demeanor was a stark contrast to their first meeting. "Lord Viserys." "Goodman Rabbi, what brings you here?" "Come on in." Viserys ushered him into the house, already guessing the reason for his visit but asking nonetheless. I have come to thank you. Thank me. Viserys remembered Rabbi's initial lukewarm attitude but chose to play along. You are too kind. It was my duty. No, no, no. Your martial arts skills are extraordinary, yet you remain so humble. You are my role model. The Titan of Bravos may be a guardian, but last night, you were the Titan of our workshop. Viserys found Rabbi's flattery amusing but kept a straight face. Rabbi continued, explaining that he and his father had prepared a simple feast and hoped Viserys would join them in the evening. Here is a small token of our appreciation. Please do come. Rabbi handed him a box with a sapphire-inlaid clasp, hinting at valuable contents inside. No problem, but what about the guards at the workshop? Viserys inquired. Rabbi quickly responded, you might not be aware during your rest, but the mayor is taking this incident very seriously. He has sent a team of guards here, ensuring no one will dare to target the workshop for the next few days. Viserys nodded, reassured by the involvement of the authorities. He doubted Rabbi and his father would suffer financially due to the presence of the guards. In that case, allow me to freshen up a bit. It's already been prepared for you, Rabbi said. To Viserys' surprise, several servants carrying hot water entered the room. 2 burly men carried large kegs, followed by 2 maids with attractive features. Viserys composed himself and took a bath with the maid's assistance. Thanks to the system's enhancements, his body was well proportioned with smooth muscle lines, almost 60 but looking far younger. The maids seemed to enjoy their task, their gazes appreciative as they carefully wiped every inch of his skin with towels. Perhaps due to the original Viserys' frequent indulgence in such services, he felt no discomfort being naked, even under the maids' attentive care. He changed into clean clothes with the help of the maids, and outside, a carriage and horses had been waiting for quite some time. The sky had darkened, and the sun's rays were fading on the distant mountains. He wondered if Bannergar had finished his work yet. Accompanied by Rabbi, Viserys walked through the flat streets of the wealthy district and arrived at a grand courtyard. From a distance, he could already sense the excitement emanating from within. Bright white light poured out of the mansion, giving the initial impression of a fire. But as they entered, the true source of the light became clear, and it was breathtaking. Hundreds of candles lit up the courtyard, making it as bright as day. For a moment, Viserys was so captivated by the sight that he felt as if he had returned to his previous world. 3 long tables were set up, laden with an abundance of food. Not far away, a group of musicians played lively tunes, and a dozen servants bustled about, attending to the guests. Rabbi and his father had invited all the team members, who were making a ruckus and stuffing their faces with food. Regis stood out, larger than the others, wearing a lilac jacket. He danced around, animatedly recounting the battle, making it seem as if he had single-handedly repelled the attackers. Helbo, who had been watching the door, was the first to notice Viserys' arrival. He stood up and tapped his glass with a fork, producing a clear sound that silenced the noisy feast. Hey, look. It's our hero, Lord Viserys. Let's drink a toast to him. The crowd quieted down, and those who had been flirting with the maids quickly stopped. They all turned towards Viserys, raising their glasses in his honor. Helbo handed Viserys a glass of wine. Just as he was about to take a sip, several men came up behind him and lifted him into the air. Viserys. 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 The name echoed throughout the courtyard as they carried him around, celebrating his bravery. They finally set him down after the 3rd lap, to the sound of hearty cheers. To the bravery of Lord Viserys. Morel proposed another toast. Bravery, the team members echoed, raising their glasses once more. Viserys knew he had to say something meaningful on such an occasion. Though not particularly skilled in public speaking, he tried to recall the demeanor of his old instructor. He raised his glass and began, "Everyone, your hard work over the past few days has been commendable. It is because of our unity and determination that the workshop has remained safe and sound. Together, we are like a blazing fire, strong and unstoppable. Apart, we are like stars, shining brightly in our own right. Let us continue to grow, become stronger, and create new glories." The speech was a bit awkward even for Viserys himself, but Morel and Helbo were impressed. His noble background gave his words a certain authority, and the atmosphere grew even more spirited. As the festivities continued, Viserys and the other leaders gathered in a more private setting to discuss matters further. "Do you know who Anderson is?" "I heard that name from those people," Viserys asked, now surrounded only by Helbo and the Morel. "Anderson." Rabbi looked puzzled, but Morel and Helbo exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. "Anderson. Could it be him?" Morel frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. Is there a problem with him? Helbo asked, setting his wine glass down. No, Morel shook his head. He's in the land business. We don't interact much. Viserys observed them carefully, feeling a bit like an outsider. The previous night's battle had been intense, and the heavy losses meant it would be difficult for Morel's enemies to organize another similar attack. With most of his mission accomplished, Viserys felt that the fate of the workshop was no longer his concern as long as he received his payment. The next day, Helbo approached Viserys with an apologetic expression, making him realize that the situation he was involved in was more complicated than it had initially seemed. Chapter 20, Illyrio in the courtyard. Dany practiced swordsmanship under the guidance of a skilled water dancer swordsman. Meanwhile, Viserys conversed with Helbo about the workshop's current situation. Lady Phalia and another lady named Gortave are both popular candidates for the beauty pageant at the 10-day celebration, Helbo began, sharing the latest gossip. Fernan seems to be Gortave's supporter. Gortave once said she would build a new theater in Greenwater Town. And the most suitable place in Greenwater Town. Helbo continued, piecing together information he had gathered over the past few days. Morel's workshop is in a bad situation. Many skilled workers have left, and it seems they lost a lot of money when they bought whale oil, he concluded. Helbo then turned to Viserys, his expression filled with regret. Viserys, it's all my fault. We've expanded too quickly. He kept apologizing, assuring Viserys that he would find a way to pay his share of the compensation. Viserys, however, sat in his chair, deep in thought. I heard there will be a tournament at the 10-day celebration. I want to sign up, Viserys suddenly announced. Helbo's heart sank. Was Viserys hit in the head? The prize for the tournament was generous, but the competition was fierce, attracting sword masters who had been honing their skills for decades. The tournaments were dangerous, with deaths occurring almost every time. Helbo tried to dissuade him. You haven't been in Bravos long enough to know, but every tournament brings out a new crop of sword masters, and almost every time someone dies in the arena. Helbo warned. My goal is not to win the championship. I have other plans, Viserys reassured him. In fact, Viserys wasn't fooling Helbo. After spending more than 3 months in this world, he had sensed some subtle changes. According to the original plot, he and Dany would have run away to another city to avoid debt. But because of his transmigration, Viserys not only stayed in Bravos, but he was also thriving. He sensed that the assassin newly sent by Robert was quite capable. According to the images in his dream, the assassin had been drifting at sea for at least 10 days, showing his toughness. Robert had been on the throne for more than 10 years, spending all his time partying and drinking, and racking up a huge debt. Now, he had been in power for less than 8 years, and the financial situation had not yet deteriorated to the point of being out of control. What if he found that Viserys was growing up too fast and decided to bite the bullet and pay the Faceless Men hundreds of thousands of gold dragons to assassinate him? The headquarters of the Faceless Men, the House of Black and White, was in Bravos. Viserys hoped to raise his value as much as possible through the tournament, making the price Robert would have to pay for his assassination prohibitively high. The remnants of the former dynasty might be far away, but the gold coins in front of Robert were not. Viserys believed this possibility was very high. After all, when the Mother of Dragons was pregnant in the original story, Robert hadn't bothered to find the Faceless Men. Now, it was even less likely. Viserys was confident that in 3 months, his constitution would improve significantly, allowing him to fully display his sword skills. At the same time, the water dancer swordsman teaching Dany was also gaining knowledge and skill from their sessions. He would likely achieve a good ranking in the upcoming competition. Viserys had heard that the champion of the swordsmanship competition would be awarded a Valyrian steel sword, while the poetry competition champion would receive a dragon egg. These were generous prizes from Bravos, and though it was just a rumor, the value of the final prize was expected to be substantial. If he could win a lot of money through the competition, Viserys planned to take Dany and leave Bravos. He would hide and bide his time, eventually changing his appearance and joining a mercenary group. With the money earned, he could buy more dragon eggs. 3 were not enough, he needed at least 5. In a few years, Dany would hatch the dragons, and they would retrace the Mother of Dragons' path to glory. Of course, the part about marrying the Horse Lord would be omitted. Viserys was confident he could command a 1,000-man mercenary group within a few years, all without selling his sister. After hatching the dragons, he would go directly to Astapor in Slaver's Bay to recruit those who sought vengeance. These plans, however, he kept to himself. To Helbo, he only mentioned his intention to participate in the tournament. Helbo, having no reason to refuse, promised to take care of the registration. Just as the two were about to part ways, Viserys' servant entered and reported, "Lord, there is a man outside who claims to be Illyrio and says he wants to see you." Illyrio. Viserys' eyebrows raised, and his whole body tensed in high vigilance. This Illyrio was, in many ways, the most important person he had encountered since his arrival. Viserys guessed that Illyrio was far more than just a merchant, he had quite a reputation and considerable influence. Viserys thought that if Illyrio could get in touch with the Horse Lords, he could probably connect with many sellsword leaders as well. Although Viserys no longer planned to use Illyrio to sell his sister, maintaining contact with him was crucial if he wanted to pursue the sellsword route in the future. Helbo, perceptive as ever, noticed Viserys' reaction and realized he was not needed. He took the initiative to leave, exiting through a small door. Viserys now felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. Illyrio was the second original character he had met. This man had a lot of influence and power. He turned to the maid and said, "Jill, tell Dany that today's lesson is over. Take her to change and wait in the drawing room." "Yes, m'lord," Jill replied. Viserys took a deep breath, changed into a silver coat provided by the servant, and walked straight to the front door. Outside the gate, a corpulent man sat in a lavish carriage. His golden beard and hair, combined with a red robe, exuded an aura of wealth. Rings adorned every finger, each one colorful and ornate. Despite his opulent appearance, young Illyrio was once an assassin. Through his cunning and resourcefulness, he became a wealthy merchant in Pentos. Dragon bones, dragon eggs, jewelry, these were all part of his extensive business. His luxurious carriage parked outside was a symbol of his wealth, attracting the attention of everyone on the street. Illyrio had begun gathering information on Viserys as soon as he arrived in the city. The boy had reportedly killed more than 10 people in one night. This was extraordinary. Illyrio had initially thought that Viserys would be a broken man after the Feast of the Crown, but instead, he seemed to have developed a new talent. Soon, Illyrio saw Viserys approaching. Any doubts he might have had vanished when he saw the handsome young man. Viserys exuded an aura of confidence and strength, and Illyrio could sense his presence even from a distance. The scent of blood was unmistakable. Chapter 21, Bluffing. Illyrio exuded an aura of luxury, but in a more remote area, he would stand out like a fish out of water. However, his bodyguards were no amateurs. The coachman and the guards following the carriage were not to be underestimated. Especially noteworthy was the guard in the brown coat, whose broad chest and strong thighs hinted at his prowess even through his clothes. Illyrio himself had once been an assassin, and his entourage were no slouches either. They quickly sized each other up with practiced ease. "Prince Viserys," Illyrio called out as he descended from the carriage with the help of his escort, a smile on his lips. "Lord Illyrio," Viserys replied. "You are becoming more and more like Prince Rhaegar." Illyrio knew better than to compare Viserys to his father, the Mad King. Instead, he chose to flatter Viserys by comparing him to Rhaegar, who still had a good reputation despite his flaws. "Ha, you're joking. I'm no match for my brother. But you're in luck. The fog in Braavos has lifted a lot since you were announced to be coming." The two exchanged pleasantries and headed towards the living room. Illyrio quickly noted that Viserys had changed. Previously, Viserys had been stiff and formal in social situations. Now, he carried himself with casual confidence. Despite living in a place that was not as grand as before, Viserys made it seem stylish with his bearing. As they passed through the courtyard, Illyrio noticed the mannequins and weapons rack. While the clean weapons rack could be attributed to diligent servants, the densely marked dummy target told a different story. It indicated that Viserys had not neglected his martial arts training. Soon, they arrived at the living room. The furnishings were relatively ordinary, with a reasonable number of lamps, all courtesy of Morel. However, a few chairs caught Illyrio's attention. They were a bit too wide. When Illyrio sat down, he found them to be soft and comfortable, almost like being embraced. With the intuition of a successful businessman, he immediately recognized the value of these chairs. Could it be a new product from Braavos? No, if Braavos had such a thing, I would have heard about it. He thought. Could it be that the young prince had designed the chair himself? Suppressing his curiosity for the moment, Illyrio refocused on Viserys. "I heard that the prince has been doing some business with loans lately." Yes, it's just enough to support my sister," Viserys replied, generously explaining how he had entered this industry. His unreserved attitude impressed Illyrio. Illyrio knew that some fallen nobles could be overly ambitious yet lack practical skills, unwilling to do any real work and preferring to remain poor. As a businessman with a pragmatic instinct, Viserys' attitude resonated with him. However, if Viserys intended to live like this indefinitely without any ambition to restore his kingdom, his investment value would be significantly reduced. What are your plans for the future, Prince? Illyrio asked indirectly, probing for Viserys' true ambitions. Viserys' lips curled slightly into a knowing smile. Instead of answering Illyrio's question directly, he posed one of his own. Do you think Robert's rule is stable? Illyrio's eyes widened a fraction before he replied thoughtfully. When Robert first raised an army, he had the backing of the North, the Vale, and the Riverlands. He and Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, were both wards of Lord Arryn of the Vale, and the two were like brothers. Later, he gained the support of the Westerlands by marrying Cersei. Under these circumstances, Highgarden also pledged its allegiance. As for Dorne, they are somewhat isolated and weak. Viserys nodded, understanding the implications. When the Targaryens were first overthrown, Dorne had even approached him to discuss a marriage alliance, only to later swear fealty to Robert. Their willingness to engage with Viserys had diminished as Robert's rule solidified. Illyrio's point was clear: Viserys' chances of reclaiming the throne were slim, and he wanted to gauge Viserys' reaction. My lord, Viserys began, I believe the fate of Westeros may ultimately be decided by a woman. Illyrio raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Take Robert, for example. The Baratheons are all black-haired and blue-eyed, yet his 3 children are blonde and blue-eyed. Another example, in the early years, rumors abounded that Peter Baelish boasted of sleeping with Catelyn Tully, but the one who was in love with him was her sister, Lisa. You know what happened to Lisa? She married Jon Arryn, a man old enough to be her father. Littlefinger's rise to power in the court is inseparable from her influence. Illyrio, a merchant who thrived on information, leaned in, clearly fascinated by Viserys' insights. Viserys continued, have you heard about Ned Stark's bastard? Illyrio nodded, curious if there was more to the story. It's said that the boy might actually be Rhaegar's son with Lyanna Stark, Viserys revealed mysteriously. Illyrio's eyes widened in surprise. The notion seemed implausible at first, but then he realized it wasn't entirely impossible. Everyone in the 7 Kingdoms knew about Rhaegar and Lyanna, and their relationship had been one of the catalysts for Robert's rebellion. However, the implications of Viserys' statement were profound. This is the benefit of being a transmigrator, Viserys thought proudly, feeling a pang of sympathy for his nephew. But Illyrio's instinct to seek verification quickly kicked in. Your news. Viserys remained enigmatic. Varys, he said simply. Illyrio's eyes widened in realization. It all made sense. When it came to information, no one was better than Varys. He hadn't considered that Varys might still be in contact with Viserys, even from within the Red Keep. Illyrio looked at Viserys with newfound respect. No wonder he had recovered from the blow of the Feast of the Crown. He had found a powerful ally. But how had Varys managed to contact him? And why hadn't Illyrio known about it? Before he could puzzle it out, Viserys changed the subject. I recently heard a very wise saying, good luck does not favor fools, and opportunities are reserved for those who are prepared. He continued, a good knight keeps his sword sharp at all times, waiting for the right moment. Practicing martial arts, studying, and even saving money, these are all things I need to do and am doing. Chapter 22, Hoarding Rare Goods. A man as astute as Illyrio couldn't be fooled by Viserys' lofty words. What truly intrigued him was the possibility that Viserys had the support of Varys. He wondered why Varys hadn't informed him, but he knew better than to reveal their secret now. Illyrio clapped his hands, signaling to the brown-clad guard. Bring me the gift I prepared for the prince. The guard looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, m'lord, I left the gift in the carriage. Illyrio feigned anger. You useless piece of trash, you can't even do this simple task. Go get it. Yes, m'lord. The guard hurried out of the room, his demeanor relaxing as soon as he turned away. Viserys understood the game. If he hadn't shown potential or value, the gift might never have been given. But he knew better than to question it. They would keep their thoughts to themselves and maintain the charade of friendship. While the guard retrieved the gift, Dany finally emerged from her room. She wore a light purple dress and moved gracefully, her long silver hair adorned with delicate accessories. Her small hands lifted the hem of her skirt, revealing a vision of ethereal beauty. With her silver hair and violet eyes, she looked like a moonlit fairy, an elf among flowers. Brother, Dany said softly to Viserys, before turning to Illyrio. This is Illyrio, Viserys reminded her. Illyrio's eyes widened in amazement as he looked at Dany. He took a moment to compose himself before returning her greeting. Viserys, noticing Illyrio's distraction, said to Dany, come, sit by my side. Dany obediently sat next to Viserys, her back straight and her manners impeccable. Illyrio had seen Dany before at the house with the red door, where she had been an adorable child. Now, she was blossoming into a captivating young woman. Although she wasn't yet in full bloom, she had already developed a striking presence. In the original storyline, Illyrio was supposed to meet the Viserys siblings a few years later, when Dany was around 12 or 13 and had just started menstruating. In Viserys' world, such a marriage would be considered criminal, but here, it was the norm. Even at 15 or 16, Dany had the potential to charm a sellsword leader and make him her loyal advisor. Illyrio's reaction to seeing Dany's beauty, even at a younger age, had been one of shock. Now, seeing her a little more mature, he was equally captivated. Illyrio paused for a moment, then continued, "Prince, you mentioned that you are accumulating wealth while improving your skills. With all due respect, wealth accumulation is a lengthy process for ordinary people without capital." Viserys leaned in, intrigued. "Go on." Illyrio smiled, sensing Viserys' interest. "Take me, for example. It took me nearly half my adult life to earn my first pot of gold. However, it only took 2 or 3 years to earn my second and third pots of gold. The same principle applies to land. It may take generations to acquire the first piece, but once you have it, acquiring more becomes significantly easier. I believe the same holds true for a kingdom. You may need an initial boost." Viserys understood immediately. "You mean a starting capital?" "Exactly," Illyrio nodded. "Marriage is a common means of alliance between nobles, much like the proposed marriage between you and Dorne. However, given the current situation..." Viserys understood the implication. The alliance might fall through. "But if you trust me, I believe I can find a suitable marriage partner for Princess Dany, one who might bring an army as a dowry." Dany, now part of the conversation, blinked nervously. The mention of marriage unsettled her, for she was too young to grasp its full consequences. She bit her lip, trying to keep her composure, remembering Viserys' teachings on maintaining royal composure. Viserys sensed her discomfort but kept his focus on Illyrio. "Of course, I've considered this. However, given our current circumstances, finding a suitable match for Dany might be challenging." Dany trembled slightly at Viserys' words, feeling a pang of sorrow at the thought of separation. She had always imagined being with Viserys forever, and now, the idea of parting weighed heavily on her young heart. Viserys, despite his words, had no intention of using Dany as a bargaining chip. His predecessor's approach of trading family for power was something he now disdained. He believed in the value of strength for protection, not just for its own sake. His apparent interest in the marriage was merely to keep Illyrio engaged. As a wealthy magister of Pentos, Illyrio was well versed in Targaryen traditions. To secure his support, Viserys needed to play along. Sure enough, Illyrio approved of Viserys' attitude. Meanwhile, the guard returned with the gift. Wrapped in red silk, its shape was unmistakable, a long bow. The guard placed the gift on the table, and Illyrio himself removed the silk, revealing a black dragonbone bow. The bow, 4 or 5 feet long, was as black as the night sky, curved like a crescent moon, as if crafted from a dragon's rib. It exuded a powerful and mysterious aura. Alongside the bow were 3 replacement strings, a testament to Illyrio's thoughtful preparation. "A small token of my appreciation. Please accept it, Prince." "Thank you, Illyrio. I accept it with gratitude." Viserys smiled as he picked up the dragonbone bow. Pale blue text appeared in front of his eyes, 2.58 points. "Is it related to the size?" Viserys put his questions aside for the time being. Illyrio was in the dragonbone business. "If I could just take a look around his warehouse." He pulled the bowstring without making a sound, drawing it to about 70% of its capacity. This display of strength was impressive for a minor and gave Illyrio a glimpse of Viserys' potential. He carefully supported the bowstring and let it slowly return to its resting position, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Illyrio. This showed his respect and understanding of the weapon, earning him more favor from the merchant. Any bow left unstrung could suffer damage, and as a jeweler and dragonbone merchant, Illyrio appreciated the care Viserys showed. Although the bow was now a gift, it still meant something to him that it would be cherished. The two men chatted a while longer. Illyrio mentioned he had another business meeting to attend, so he didn't stay long. Before leaving, he left Viserys another gift. Viserys couldn't help but marvel at Illyrio's extravagance. Chapter 23, Confession Night, terrifying skin changer. This dragonbone bow only further confirmed Viserys' suspicions. It seemed that contact with dragon products provided assignable points, and continuous contact would keep those points accumulating. As soon as his meeting with Illyrio was over, he opened his panel to check. Every morning, Viserys would add assignable points to his constitution and then reallocate proficiency points from other skills to his swordsmanship. Today, he found that his assignable points had increased from 0 to 2.58. The Dragonbone Bow had added 2.5 assignable points. With the 0.05 bonus from the Dragonbone Dagger, the 0.08 from the Dragonbone Bow, and his original 0.1, his daily assignable points had increased to 0.23, more than doubling his rate of accumulation. With less than 4 months until the 10-day celebration, this meant his constitution could increase by over 20 points, bringing it to at least 80 plus. This would make him a top-notch warrior, greatly increasing his chances of ranking well or even winning the championship. If the prize for the champion of the sword competition was truly a Valyrian steel sword, Viserys would fight for it no matter what. Valyrian steel swords were light, tough, and hard, a holy weapon in the heart of every swordsman. However, he wondered if Braavos would really be willing to give away such a weapon, suspecting there might be some shady dealings behind the scenes. Viserys also planned to participate in the poetry contest. Who says you can't be a copycat in a different world? As an art student, he had heard countless classics, and just one of his poems could spread to every corner of this world. If the prize was indeed a dragon egg, he had to try his hand at it. There was just one problem: to participate in the poetry competition, he needed the approval of someone of a high social standing, unless he was already a famous master and could enter on his own. Otherwise, no matter how good his work was, it would be useless if no one could give him the exposure he needed. The courtesans were very strict with the performers who wanted to use their fame to compete. If they performed well, they could help each other; if not, they wasted the courtesans' resources. Braavos officials took this matter very seriously, as did Highgarden in Westeros, which also had great respect for poets and singers. Thanks to these artists, Highgarden had become the most beautiful castle in the Seven Kingdoms. Even though they were thousands of miles apart, there was a subtle competitive tension between the two. If the prize for the poetry contest was a dragon egg, Viserys would definitely participate. Another great gift Illyrio had left was a large sum of money stored in the Iron Bank. Whether it was a loan or a donation was left unsaid, but Viserys didn't plan to pay him back. He suggested that Illyrio could try his hand at the couch business, which would be profitable enough. The two men understood each other perfectly without saying a word. At dinner, Viserys noticed that Dany was unusually downcast. She picked at her food, barely eating, and responded minimally when he spoke to her. "I'm full," she said, rising from her seat and preparing to go upstairs. "Wait a minute," Viserys called, glancing at the maid standing by and gesturing for her to leave. He understood that Dany's mood was likely due to Illyrio's marriage proposal earlier in the day. As the maid left and the room grew quiet, the candlelight flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls. The strange atmosphere made Dany's heart tighten. Viserys looked at her, taking in her downcast purple eyes and the way her silver braids hung down her shoulders and across her chest. Her arms, exposed by the open sleeves of her dress, glowed with a pearly luster. She was the embodiment of exquisitely beautiful. "Dany, will you stay by my side forever?" he asked gently. Dany met his gaze, momentarily stunned by the intensity in his eyes. It's just like you think, just like Aegon and his sisters," Viserys continued. Dany was no longer a child, and she could vaguely understand the implications of his words. A blush spread across her cheeks, and her ears began to burn. Viserys walked up to her and whispered, "I will never use you as a bargaining chip," he said, kissing her forehead lightly. "Wait until you grow up." Dany watched him leave, sitting in the chair for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. It felt as if she had received something precious, and she couldn't help but stamp her feet lightly a few times before finally heading upstairs. During this time, Viserys felt much more at ease. His days were spent at the workshop, and in the evenings, he cherished moments with Dany. He also found time to practice archery, adding a new skill to his repertoire. However, due to the strict laws in Braavos, which prohibited the use of bows and arrows outside the home, he refrained from upgrading his archery skills immediately. He planned to do so later when he joined the sellswords. An incident during a meal brought a serious realization. When a maid reminded Dany to be cautious of hot food, Viserys recognized the potential danger if her identity was ever exposed to the Faceless Men. This would increase the priority of her assassination. Robert might even consider hiring the Faceless Men to target Dany. Known for their unpredictability and penchant for considering assassination an art, the Faceless Men might offer Robert a discount for the chance to eliminate such a unique person. Determined to protect her, Viserys began training Dany to act as though she feared the heat. Without strength, there is no sense of security, he thought, watching her fall asleep. He prepared to use dragon dreams again to gather more information about the assassin. After the first time he actively used dragon dreams to search for information, he noticed his magic had increased by 0.3, bringing it to 19. This was significantly faster than his constitution, which increased by less than 0.1 points per day through diligent exercise. However, the recovery period for using dragon dreams was lengthy, taking 2 or 3 days to fully recuperate. During this time, he felt sluggish, and his efficiency in exercising or practicing swordsmanship was greatly reduced. He mused that in 3 or 4 years, when the tide of magic returned, figures like Melisandre, the Green Seers, and various magical creatures would start to re-emerge, making magic once again a dominant force in the world. For Viserys, physical prowess such as swordsmanship and constitution were essential, so he didn't focus on improving his magic attributes. After lying down, Viserys activated dragon dreams to track down the assassin once again. He figured that after more than 10 days, the assassin might have perished at sea. This time, he planned to quickly confirm the assassin's status and then end the dream promptly. It didn't take long for Viserys to enter the dragon dream state. He heard the muffled voices of seagulls and the sound of waves overlapping. The sun was slowly sinking into the sea, creating a golden veil. Surprisingly, the assassin was still alive but lying on a sampan like a dead fish, seemingly at death's door. In the next moment, the assassin sprang to life, rolled over, and scooped up a small fish from the water. Viserys was taken aback. No, is this really possible, he thought, his knowledge of survival techniques exceeded. Remembering his past life as a member of the Air Force, he considered taking the assassin as his master for survival skills. With his fishing prowess, the assassin could probably survive another 10 days adrift at sea. The assassin skillfully prepared the fish with his dagger, displaying a certain elegance in his movements. However, Viserys noticed something strange. When the assassin cut open the fish, his body trembled as if he had been punched. His expression also indicated he was enduring some intense pain. Viserys decided not to watch further and interrupted the vision. He opened his panel and saw, Magic, 6.1, in less than half a minute, he had used up most of his magic. Fortunately, he stopped in time, avoiding dizziness or loss of cognitive ability. Viserys sat up in bed and looked out the window. It was completely dark outside. It seemed that the range of Dragon Dream's reconnaissance could span different time zones. Maybe, he thought, he could one day find out why this planet always had extreme weather. But for the time being, he put the idea out of his mind and went to his desk. Unbelievable way of fishing, he wrote, it's like a synesthetic response. He began to think deeply about what he had witnessed. Fish react quickly, and if the killer had used a tool to spear them, that would be one thing. But this guy was lying on a paddle boat, catching fish with his bare hands. Speed and precision, both were essential. And with his face to the sky, could it be that this guy had such good hearing that he could locate the fish by sound alone? It seemed impossible. Then there was the synesthesia. Judging from his state, he hadn't been short of food these days. There was an endless supply of sea fish, and he hadn't even lost much weight. But the reaction of shaking when he stabbed the fish was really strange. Could it be some kind of psychological reaction? Or a negative state? Or perhaps a punishment? Killing an animal and being hurt in return, there could only be one explanation, a skin changer. Viserys suddenly felt a chill down his spine. The skin changers in the novel could transfer their consciousness into the body of an animal, possessing their skills and senses. The animals they possessed were called animal companions. Eagles, goats, dogs, dire wolves. One of the more famous skin changers was Bran Stark, who was a wolf spirit and the heir to the three-eyed raven. He could transfer his consciousness not only to his own dire wolf but also to Hodder. In addition, Jon and a bunch of wildlings beyond the wall were also skin changers. The information about skin changers noted that if their animal companion died, they would also be affected. If the host died, the consciousness would be trapped in the animal. The assassin's reaction after killing the fish was remarkably similar to that of a skin changer. Judging from the current situation, the assassin was able to capture an animal companion in a short period of time. And after killing the animal companion, he could continue to withstand the effects of its death. This indicated he might be a high-level skin changer. A very high-level one. With such a strong ability to invade consciousness, could he directly invade people's minds? Viserys pounded the table with some anxiety and cursed in a low voice, damn it. Robert, that fucking lickspittle, where the hell did he find such a fucking cheater? Chapter 24, Temple of the Moonsingers, he must never be allowed to go ashore. Viserys felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead at the thought of the assassin's demonstrated abilities. Skin changers are terrifying, they can completely control animals to assassinate or poison without leaving any trace. Their skills are as formidable as his own dragon dreams. But Viserys quickly calmed himself. First of all, such a powerful assassin is unlikely to be at the command of just anyone. Otherwise, it would be a waste to use him for an assassination attempt on someone like himself. If the assassin worked for Robert, then why not use him to solve his debt problems first? Robert's bias against the Westerlands could have been exploited to get rid of Cersei and even the old lion, Tywin. And if the assassin belonged to Littlefinger or Varys, it would be even more impossible. These two don't trust easily. Littlefinger has always been scheming to rise to power. To kill Jon Arryn, the foster father of Ned and Robert, he had to manipulate his mistress, Lisa. And who knows what Varys is up to? If Varys could control such a powerful skin changer, he would have already taken advantage of it. So it is very likely that the true extent of the assassin's abilities is not known to others. This makes Viserys a little worried. Calming his emotions, he realized that since he had dragon dreams, he didn't need to worry too much. Although the assassin's methods are more bizarre, Viserys has the advantage of foresight. If the assassin does make it to Braavos, he can prepare in advance and even arrange an ambush. The odds of winning are still in his favor. For now, Viserys decided to visit the temples of Braavos to see if there were any clues to increasing his magic power. His first choice was the Temple of the Moonsingers. Before Braavos was built, it was the Moonsingers who led the slaves escaping the Valyrian Empire to find this sanctuary of prophecy. And prophecy is real in the world of Game of Thrones. Since they can predict the future, it means that this group of people has some real power. In the original story, the Moonsinger taught Dany the Song of Childbirth. Perhaps there are other songs, so Viserys decided to take advantage of his free time and visit. Dany practices swordsmanship very hard every day, so Viserys decided to give her a break and take her along. "Where are we going?" Dany asked excitedly. The last time she went out with Viserys was to buy fish. "Let's go to the Moonsinger Temple, bring some money." "Okay," she replied enthusiastically. She changed into a light blue dress, tied her silver white hair into a pigtail, and let it fall behind her head. Viserys couldn't help but notice how well light-colored clothes complemented their hair and skin tones. In a world where everything seems a bit dirty and dark, the two of them quickly became the focus of attention wherever they went. The siblings got into the carriage and, after half an hour, passed an arch bridge, catching sight of the Temple of the Moonsingers in the distance. Dany, sitting in the carriage, lifted the curtain and looked out with her purple eyes. She immediately recognized the white building as the Temple of the Moonsingers. The all-white temple stood out prominently among the other structures. It was the largest temple in Braavos, built to honor and thank the Moonsingers. The grand marble palace was topped with a large silver-white dome, surrounded by milky white glass windows depicting the different phases of the moon. As they stepped out of the carriage, they saw a pair of marble statues of maidens standing guard at the temple's main gate. The spotless stone slabs at their feet added to the feeling of tranquility and holiness. A beautiful woman, accompanied by a maid, emerged from the temple and happened to meet the siblings. "What a beautiful girl. I hope my child will be as beautiful as her," the woman said softly, touching her slightly swollen belly. "That's for sure, Lady Medes. Your beauty will be passed on to your child," the maid replied, bringing a pleased smile to the lady's face. Lady Medes then noticed that Dany was standing next to a young man. Observing their similar features, she guessed they were siblings. "That young man is also very handsome," she remarked. Viserys nodded slightly to the woman, and Dany smiled back, her purple eyes as bright as jewels, melting the woman's heart. She gestured to the maid standing beside her, who approached the siblings and said, "Lord, Lady Medes would like to have a word with you. Is this a convenient time?" "Of course," Viserys replied. The maid led them to Lady Medes. Viserys observed that the lady, likely in her mid-20s, appeared pregnant. Her round face and flushed cheeks hinted at her condition, though there was a hint of grayish-white on her blush. The slightly bulging belly suggested she was drawn to Dany by overflowing maternal love. So the so-called Temple of the Moonsingers is actually a temple for women, and this is where they tie up dolls, Viserys thought to himself. He then approached the noblewoman and said, "Lady, your beauty adorns this city." "Oh, your praise is like a spring breeze," she replied with a gracious smile, "but I must admit, the beauty of you and your sister evokes a bit of jealousy." Dany blushed shyly, realizing that the lady was praising her. This reaction only endeared her more to the noblewoman, who immediately removed a bracelet adorned with colorful gemstones from her wrist and offered it to Dany. The bracelet, crafted from gold and studded with pigeon egg-sized gemstones, was undoubtedly expensive. Viserys initially wanted to decline out of politeness, but the noblewoman's extravagance made him decide otherwise. Dany glanced at Viserys, seeking his approval. Seeing his encouraging nod, she lifted the hem of her skirt, bowed in thanks, and allowed the noblewoman to clasp the bracelet around her wrist. For an 8-year-old, the bracelet was too large, and Dany had to bend her arm to keep it from slipping off. The noblewoman, seemingly pleased by the encounter, left shortly after, her servant helping her into a beautiful carriage. Viserys noted the depiction of 2 hands on the back of the carriage and recognized it as the Zaline House crest. Zaline House was one of the 3 great houses of Braavos, along with House Targaryen, from which the current Sea Lord hailed, and House Frigger. Though the Sea Lord was nominally chosen from the entire population of Braavos, in practice, almost all came from these 3 houses. Who says good looks don't pay the bills? This is how you pay the bills, Viserys thought with a smirk. After checking the bracelet to ensure it was genuine, he took Dany's hand and led her into the temple. Chapter 25, Song of the Moon. After entering the temple, Viserys and Dany were struck by the pristine whiteness of the walls, dome, and statues. Sunlight filtered through windows representing different phases of the moon, creating a beautiful circle of light on the ground, giving the impression of a magical circle beneath their feet. This enchanting effect added to the temple's serene and otherworldly atmosphere. The 3 statues of goddesses at the front of the temple were the most eye-catching. Carved from marble, each statue stood 4 or 5 meters tall, reminiscent of the grandeur of the statue of David that Viserys had seen in his previous life. The central goddess held a book and wore a hood, while the 2 goddesses on either side, slightly shorter, held a sword and a lamp respectively. To the right of these statues stood a yellow wooden donation box, where visitors would place money after praying. Viserys noticed someone praying silently before the statues, hands clasped in reverence. Not wanting to disturb the worshipper, he led Dany to explore the murals depicting the legends of the moon singers. One mural caught Dany's attention. "Brother, look, the moon is cracking," she whispered. "Cracking?" Viserys followed her gaze and saw that the moon in the mural indeed appeared to have a crack running through it. At first glance, it looked like a flaw in the wall, but on closer inspection, it was clear the moon was intentionally depicted as cracked. Viserys recalled the Valyrian legends of dragons emerging from a split moon and wondered why this well-known story wasn't depicted in the mural. Perhaps there was another explanation, but he decided to leave that mystery for another time. Once the prayer group left, Viserys led Dany to the statue of the central goddess. Nearby, a tall, thin holy sister wearing a white hood stood attentively, responding to the worshippers based on their donations. Her gaze lingered on the striking siblings as they approached. Viserys nodded slightly at the holy sister, who seemed captivated by his presence. He closed his eyes, furrowing his brow to convey a sense of deep worry. He knew she would be watching, and to engage her in a meaningful conversation, he needed to leverage the power of his money. Of course, his intention was purely to gain insight and help, not anything untoward. After about 2 or 3 minutes, Viserys approached the yellow donation box. He took a handful of gold coins from his pocket and dropped them into the box through the round hole in the lid. The holy sister's eyes lit up at the sight of the generous donation. She was struck by the young man's handsome appearance and apparent wealth. Clearly, something was troubling him, and she felt compelled to offer her assistance. As Viserys turned away from the box, the holy sister approached him. She first drew a circle on her chest, a gesture used by the moon singers, and then said, "May the goddess guide us." "May the goddess guide us," Viserys responded in kind. "I noticed your solemn expression while you were praying. Have you encountered a problem? If you have a family member traveling far away, I have a song of protection. If you have a wife giving birth, I have a song of childbirth. If you are confused about something, I have a song of guidance." Viserys slightly bowed and replied, "Thank you for your kindness. We don't have any relatives traveling far away. My sister and I are each other's only family." The holy sister's eyes widened in surprise. She had assumed that the well-dressed siblings must be from a large, affluent family, but now realized they were orphans. This incorrect assumption made her feel a bit embarrassed. "I don't have a wife either," Viserys continued, "but as for the confusion." Seeing an opportunity to use her skills, the holy sister interjected, "Please, tell me what is troubling you." Viserys looked embarrassed, hesitating before speaking. "Actually, I don't know how to explain it. I've been having strange dreams lately, and I feel dizzy and exhausted when I wake up. I'm worried that I might have a strange disease, but the healer told me that my body is in perfect health. So, I came to seek the goddess's guidance." The holy sister pondered his words. It didn't seem like a psychological issue that her usual talking therapy could address, but she didn't want to turn Viserys away without trying to help. "Is that so? I wonder if you could stay a little longer so I can fetch something that might help you," she suggested. "Thank you very much," Viserys replied, watching as the holy sister walked past the statue and through a small door. Everything Viserys had just said entered Dany's ears. She always thought that her brother was an inexhaustible well of energy, waking up before she opened her eyes and falling asleep after she closed them. She never imagined that Viserys would have such a problem with his body, and the realization made her very worried. She couldn't help but blame herself. 5 minutes later, the Holy Sister returned, holding a thin booklet in her hand. "Lord, I think it may be the things in your dreams that are troubling you. This is the Moon Song of the Moon Chanting Temple. Chanting it under the moonlight will bring peace of mind and may help you." Viserys looked at the booklet, noticing it was slightly yellowed, as if the Holy Sister had used it herself. "This must be your personal item. It's too precious, I don't think I can accept it." The Holy Sister smiled warmly, pulling the fine lines at the corners of her mouth, which made people feel at ease. "Don't worry, I've memorized the contents. Consider it a gift." "A gift? This?" Viserys hesitated before accepting the booklet, and subconsciously activated his panel. To his surprise, when his hand touched the booklet, his magic value immediately recovered by 5 points. It seemed to be a good thing. Realizing that the trip was worthwhile, Viserys touched himself and found that he was a little short on funds. Then he said apologetically, "I'm sorry, but I think I'll be back soon. Can I talk to you again then?" The Holy Sister smiled and said, "Of course, that's not a problem." However, her eyes glanced at the bracelet on Dany's hand, understanding that her little scrapbook was not worth that. Chapter 26, Song of the Moon 2. After realizing the value of the Song of the Moon, Viserys decided to return to his residence with Dany. On the way, he discovered that the booklet contained about 3,000 words, with the main content being praise and worship of the moon. The text was written in Valyrian and had a beautiful rhythm, making it more of a chant with tones. It also required visualization of the moonlight while reading, which added a level of difficulty. As Viserys was engrossed in reading, Dany asked him, "Brother, have you been dreaming a lot lately?" "Haha, I'm fine," Viserys replied, feeling a warmth in his heart as he petted her head, realizing she was worried about him. Dany, however, secretly resolved to remind him to rest more from that day on. In the evening, Viserys found the moonlight particularly beautiful. The silver light scattered on the ground, creating a tranquil atmosphere. With the Song of the Moon in hand, Viserys climbed to a high place and began singing softly as instructed. He glanced at his magic value, which was currently 11.6. Following the prayer in the booklet, Viserys began to chant, "The bright moon is in the sky, and its light shines on the stars. The moonlight is like a shadow, the moonlight is like water." As he recited, he felt a cool energy flow into his body. The tiredness in his spirit was relieved, and his mood became more tranquil and indifferent. After about a quarter of an hour, Viserys checked his panel and found that his magic value had recovered by 2 points, reaching 13.6. Viserys was very surprised. The recovery rate of his magic was several times faster. This meant he could use dragon dreams more frequently, giving him a better chance against the assassin. He continued to recite, and this time his magic value increased again, reaching 15.2. It seems to be recovering a little slower, he thought. He calculated that the recovery effect had decreased by about 20%, meaning he could recover about 6 points of magic in an hour, and even less in the second hour. But one night was enough to fully restore his magic. Viserys continued to sing, and after 3 hours, his magic had fully recovered. "It seems the upper limit of my magic power hasn't increased. Maybe I didn't sing long enough," Viserys pondered. However, he realized that in addition to restoring his magic points, the chant also seemed to replenish his energy. It was almost 1 a.m., but he wasn't sleepy at all. Instead, his mind was sharp and active. Wait, if the Temple of the Moonsingers has such powerful benefits, what about the Temple of the Lord of Light? Viserys suddenly realized he had stumbled upon a treasure trove of opportunities. In the novels, the first mage, Melisandre, who serves the human side, worships the Lord of Light. If the Temple of the Moonsingers offered such advantages, then surely the Temple of the Lord of Light had even more to offer. Besides these two, Braavos also had the Temple of the Father of Waters, the Holy Refuge, and the infamous House of Black and White. While the last one might be difficult to access, the first two were open to those who could pay. There may be other treasures in the Temple of the Moonsingers too, Viserys thought. The Song of the Moon seemed like the basic martial arts techniques from the novels of his past life. If there was a basic exercise method for outsiders, there must be an advanced method for insiders. This visit to the Temple of the Moonsingers had cost the siblings over 30 gold dragons, but high-end items would undoubtedly cost more. "We need to make money, and we need it quickly." Viserys' intuition told him he was in a period of low magic. The heads of the various temples probably didn't value these things highly, and as long as one was willing to pay, they could be obtained. However, he needed funds now, but he couldn't hastily touch Illyrio's money. It was a strategic reserve meant to keep the other side in check. Drawing from it too soon would make him appear desperate and potentially deceitful. It was wiser to let the money sit in the Iron Bank for a while longer. The next 2 days, Viserys took advantage of the good weather and the moonlight every night, planning to have Dany practice the moon song with him. However, he overlooked one problem. Dany was now considered half-literate, and there were many words she didn't understand or didn't even know. During their time in Braavos, the siblings were brought there by Ser Willem, who unfortunately passed away a few years later. Dany was still very young then and couldn't learn much during those years. Her current education was almost like pre-childhood education, so Viserys had to hire another tutor to teach her to read and write properly. Viserys took the opportunity to write down some of his past life's knowledge in Chinese characters so that he would not forget it. Among the most important information were the plot points of the original novel, including various major events and the fates of the characters. Of course, this included the parts relevant to Dany. That's why he didn't teach her Chinese. Viserys enjoyed reading history books before his journey, as history often provided solutions to current problems. He would tell Dany stories from his world, changing the names and details, which also helped him deepen his understanding of those tales. Dany was surprised to find that Viserys' storytelling skills had improved significantly, moving beyond the simple, once-upon-a-time formula. Thanks to the whale oil candles from the workshop, their nights were much brighter and more enjoyable. These candles produced little smoke, burned brightly, and lasted a long time, enriching the siblings' nighttime activities. Unlike before, when they could only count the stars, often obscured by Braavos' frequent fog, they now had plenty of light to read and write by. One evening, Viserys decided to take a break and was telling Dany the story of the Little Mermaid. Just as they reached the crucial moment when Ariel traded her voice for legs, Helbo sent a letter for Viserys, appearing to have something important to discuss. Though worried about the fate of the Little Mermaid, Dany obediently sat to the side. "Lord Viserys, this is a letter from Helbo," the servant said, handing over the envelope. Viserys took the envelope and gently tore it open. The letter was brief. "Lord Viserys, I have invited the Morel to discuss payment at my residence tomorrow. Please be there. Also, the prize for the poetry competition has been confirmed, a dragon egg." Needless to say, Viserys was excited about the dragon egg. Although everyone believed that dragons were extinct and could no longer hatch, the egg still held high ornamental and collection value. Illyrio was in the dragon egg business, so it was plausible that Braavos or the Sea Lord's palace could use it as a prize. There was a possibility that they might use the dragon egg as a gimmick and secretly take it back later, but Viserys couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. To win the dragon egg, he needed to find a way to contact Lady Moonshadow and become her minstrel. It was said that Lady Moonshadow was not easily accessible to ordinary people, so he had to devise a plan to reach her. While the dragon egg prize was almost confirmed, the Valyrian steel sword was another matter. Such a weapon was truly magical, and it was uncertain if the Sea Lord's palace would be able to offer it as a prize. Helbo's invitation to the banquet had another motive, to get Viserys to help secure as much money as possible. Recently, a production accident occurred at the workshop. A newly recruited worker caused a small fire due to his lack of skill, resulting in the loss of hundreds of pounds of whale oil and several candle molds. The skilled workers had been lured away by another candle workshop offering higher salaries. It was evident that a powerful force with abundant financial resources was backing the rival workshop, intending to destroy Morel's business. Helbo was not particularly concerned about Morel's workshop's future, but he was worried about getting paid. Morel had the backing of Lady Moonshadow, making it difficult for Helbo to provoke him. Viserys guessed that Morel might use his assets to pay off his debts, possibly converting some whale oil into money. Whale oil. Viserys muttered, repeating the words over and over until something clicked. Whale oil is animal fat. Besides being edible and used for lighting, it can also be used to make soap. Suddenly excited, Viserys grabbed a pen and paper and started jotting down his thoughts. Dany, standing nearby, tried to peek over his shoulder but couldn't understand the strange square characters he was using. Viserys still hadn't taught her this language. As he wrote, Viserys became more animated, filling 4 or 5 sheets of paper before finally stopping. He looked over the stack of papers with satisfaction, as if he could see flowers blooming on the pages. "Dany," Viserys said happily, turning to her. "We'll soon have a dragon egg." Chapter 27, How to Turn 1 pound of gold into 2. The father and son were close to a desperate gamble. They had sold not only some of the family's most prized possessions but also a large number of shares to Lady Phalia. All they wanted was to secure a significant share in the upcoming 10-day festival, 3 months later. However, as the saying goes, misfortune never comes alone. Helbo had invited the father and son to a banquet, and the implications were clear. They needed to find a way to stabilize this volatile situation. On their way to the mansion, they encountered Viserys. Both father and son felt a chill. Viserys was now the most dynamic member of Helbo's inner circle. He could transform from a reassuring ally into a dangerous adversary at any moment, putting them under immense pressure. Master Morel, Viserys greeted from his carriage. Lord Viserys, Morel responded, trying to maintain his composure. After exchanging greetings, they fell into a brief, tense silence. Morel managed to stay calm, but young Rabbi was on pins and needles. The sight of the dozen or so corpses kept haunting him. He had dealt with the aftermath of those deaths himself, a memory he could never forget. The thought of becoming one of them made his desperation grow. Helbo mentioned he had some fine wine, quite exciting, Morel finally said, trying to break the silence with an insignificant comment. Viserys took it as a simple greeting and replied, then let's hurry and get to the banquet early. Yes. Good. Rabbi echoed, almost too eagerly. Viserys urged his driver to speed up, leaving the anxious father and son behind. Rabbi watched the dust kicked up by Viserys' carriage ahead of him, feeling a profound sense of desolation. He believed that, in Viserys' eyes, they had already become the party being pursued for payment. Remembering the fish-eater incident only deepened his dread, causing his hands and feet to grow colder. To calm himself, Rabbi clung to the thought that Lady Phalia had a stake in the workshop, and Helbo wouldn't dare push them too far. This gave him a fragile sense of security. However, he was well aware that Phalia owned many properties and it was unclear how much help they could provide. They were essentially using Phalia's name to gain leverage against Helbo, who was unaware of the true extent of Pharia's involvement. As these thoughts churned in his mind, they arrived at Helbo's mansion. Helbo, accompanied by a young accountant, greeted them. Contrary to what they expected, Helbo had not prepared a full banquet, but had set out some wine and refreshments in the living room. Helbo's attention first went to Viserys, about to speak, but noticing Morel and Rabbi behind him, he let them settle in first. Viserys, however, had his own agenda and didn't quite agree with Helbo's plan. Though he worked for Helbo, the nature of their relationship would soon change. Everyone took their seats, and Helbo got straight to the point. Master Morel, I heard there was an incident at the workshop recently. How is it being handled? Morel quickly replied, thank you for your concern. It has been dealt with properly and will not affect subsequent production. That's great. Helbo raised his voice. Let's toast to the workshop. After a few drinks, Helbo continued, Master Morel, it is an honor to work with you this time, thanks to Lord Viserys, of course. Morel and Rabbi raised their glasses to thank Viserys, who acknowledged them with a nod. Our cooperation will end in a few days, and I hope to receive some payment in advance. I know this is a bit rude, but I can reduce the amount, Helbo said, spreading his hands helplessly. I believe you understand that we are responsible for many people. Here it comes, Morel and Rabbi thought, feeling a sinking sensation in their stomachs. They knew this was Helbo's test, and their future depended on today. In reality, the money they had was far from enough, as almost all of it had been invested back into the workshop. They hoped to buy time until the first batch of goods was delivered, which might give them some breathing room. What they really needed was for Helbo to agree to delay the payment a little longer. Morel looked troubled and said, I'm really sorry, Master Helbo. We have obligations to others as well, and I understand your position. Rest assured, as soon as the first batch of goods is delivered, we will pay your fee as soon as possible. Yes, as soon as possible, Rabbi added, trying to sound convincing. Viserys touched his chin, observing Helbo's changing expression. He watched with interest as Helbo continued, oh, is that so? I've heard some troubling rumors recently that the skilled workers in your workshop have all left. When exactly will the first batch of goods be delivered? The father and son exchanged uneasy glances before forcing smiles. A little over a month, 2 at the most, Morel replied. So after the celebration. If that's the case, I'll have to charge interest, and... Helbo said seriously, I may also need some collateral. Collateral? I wonder what you think we can use as collateral. Morel asked, feeling a sense of dread. Helbo raised his glass, swirling the red liquid inside thoughtfully. The candle workshop. I believe the whale oil is the most valuable asset you have. But whale oil is the raw material for making candles. Without whale oil. Rabbi began to protest, but Morel quickly silenced him. Whale oil is indeed valuable. I wonder how much you think is appropriate as collateral, Morel asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "How much do you have?" Helbo inquired. "About 700 pounds, Morel replied. "Then 500 pounds, Helbo said decisively. Morel felt a pang of despair. Mortgaging 500 pounds would leave them with only 200 pounds, making the production of the first batch of goods quite tight. Helbo's real intention was to sell their collateral to another candle workshop. If it weren't for Phalia's involvement, he would have taken it all without hesitation. Just as Morel and his son were about to argue, a voice like the sound of nature rang out. "Helbo, I'm not in a hurry for my share. If my share is temporarily set aside, I think we should leave 350 pounds of whale oil for the workshop." Rabbi looked at Viserys with gratitude, never expecting that this god of death in his heart would turn out to be such a considerate person. 350 pounds would make the production of the first batch of goods much easier. Morel, more seasoned and perceptive, saw the unexpected defection at the negotiating table. It was surprising that Viserys would directly oppose Helbo in such a manner. Helbo, meanwhile, glanced at Viserys with some displeasure but quickly masked his irritation. "What's wrong with him? What is this kid doing?" Viserys continued in a calm, confident tone. "However, I have two conditions." Chapter 28, Helbo, stupid. Viserys had no plans to consult Helbo first. He hadn't even thought about it. He had seen high-ranking officials laugh and scold, and he had seen billionaires spit out their words. All that etiquette was meaningless to him. As long as he could steadily bring benefits, he would naturally have followers. Between himself and Helbo, it was called cooperation, but it was really just a job. Now that Viserys had the skills and the capital, why would he work for someone else? Despite Helbo's disapproving look and Morel's confusion, Viserys stated his conditions. "However, I have two conditions." "Please go on," Morel said eagerly. If there was a rift between Viserys and Helbo, it might be his chance. "First, I hope you can provide me with a venue. I have some ideas I want to try." "Yes. That's no problem." Morel agreed very quickly, and even his bald head, which had become a little grey due to repeated blows, seemed to brighten a bit. Helbo, on the other hand, gulped down a few more drinks. If Viserys didn't stand on his side, he wouldn't dare make such an outrageous demand. 350 pounds, he estimated that he would only get 200 pounds at the end of the day. As for Viserys' share, he said that he didn't need to worry about it if he didn't want it for the time being. "Second, I need you to introduce me to Lady Phalia." Helbo glanced at Viserys, the corner of his mouth curling up in a mocking arc. He realized what Viserys was trying to do. He probably wanted to take a chance on this opportunity and then own his own business. Helbo couldn't figure out why Viserys would want to do that. He knew how much money Viserys had. That amount might be enough to maintain a relatively decent life. But if he wanted to do something significant, he should give up on it as soon as possible. And his so-called ideas. There were many people in Bravos with ideas, and more ideas came out every day than fish in the sea. What was his reason? Helbo thought that Viserys was ruining his own good today. But considering Viserys might, he could endure it for now. However, he then thought it might not be a bad idea. When Viserys had been rejected and lost all his money, he would be in a better position to deal with him. Besides, could he just see Phalia of Moonshadow whenever he wanted? With this thought, Helbo relaxed and turned to observe Morel's response with a relaxed attitude. After hearing Viserys' request, Morel's brows, which had just begun to relax, furrowed again. He thought for a moment and said, "I can introduce you, but Lady Phalia's schedule seems to be very full, and I've only met her 3 times. In fact, Morel had never met her in person. He had always negotiated with Phalia's housekeeper. Of course, if it was at a banquet, he had seen her from a distance once. Phalia has the title of Moonshadow, so she always wears a veil in public. Morel has seen Phalia's person, but not her face. Rounding off is the same as never seeing." Helbo chuckled a little but didn't say anything. "No problem, just remember to mention my name." Helbo sneered inwardly, thinking, mention your name. The Beggar King's name. Morel stayed silent. He only knew that Viserys was on his side now. "Yes, when would you like to meet her?" "I'll let you know." The meeting had a relatively satisfactory outcome, at least for Viserys and Morel. Helbo undoubtedly prolonged the meeting, but Viserys went directly to the workshop with Morel afterward. Helbo saw them off at the gate, watching them leave impassively. The incident was not a big deal, but it was not a small one either. Of course, Viserys' might was a significant factor. Once they arrived at the workshop, Morel immediately found a suitable and tidy place for Viserys. All kinds of equipment were available, and Viserys was very satisfied. He first asked someone to buy all the materials for him and then specially entrusted a patrolman to be the caretaker. Considering the issue of confidentiality, Viserys did almost everything himself. The others only had to help with the rough work. At first, Rabbi was a little curious, wondering what Viserys was doing with the blankets. But under his father's tutelage, he immediately got down to the business of making candles and didn't ask any more questions. Viserys planned to make some samples first, and the materials he needed were not many. Things like whale oil were taken directly from the warehouse, and Morel and his son didn't say anything. From morning to afternoon, Viserys was busy for most of the day and finally got results. Looking at the thick, mushy substance in the cauldron, which looked like thick rice porridge, Viserys knew he had succeeded. All that was left was to let it sit for a while. As for the subsequent drying process, it would take too long, so he would probably consider the more expensive drying method. Once his technology was recognized, he could standardize the process. Afterwards, Viserys asked about the value of the workshop, which was around 30,000 gold dragons. Lady Phalia had a 40% share. After some gentle prodding from Viserys, he learned from Rabbi that Lady Phalia seemed intent on keeping the candle workshop. It seemed that the workshop was also very important to her. This gave Viserys more confidence in meeting Phalia, who was known as the Moonshadow. Even if he used the drying method, Viserys estimated that it would take half a month to wait for the first soap to be formed. During this time, he mainly practiced water dancing. Dany learned the full set, while Viserys focused on mastering the steps. This allowed Viserys' sword skills to improve rapidly. Swordsmanship, Master Plus, there are still more than 2 months, which is more than enough time, he thought. Recently, Viserys had not only maintained his sword skills but also started to learn archery. With the help of the system's point-cleaning function, he quickly reached the proficient level. One day, Viserys passively triggered dragon dreams. It seemed that the assassin had settled in a hotel in Braavos. In the past, Viserys' strength was limited, and he could only trigger dragon dreams passively when the enemy arrived, allowing him to escape. But now he had considerable strength. Looking at the entire Braavos, even the Sea Lord's escort swordsman could barely match him in a fight. That night, Viserys donned his black cloak, glanced at Dany sleeping, and then disappeared into the night. Tonight, he was going to show the assassin what it meant to be a guest in his own home. Chapter 29, the themed brothel. Viserys' dragon dreams were not yet strong enough to be directly targeted. This time, the information he obtained through a passive dragon dream was not entirely accurate. However, while his magical abilities might be limited, his reasoning skills were not. Although Braavos is vast, certain key locations serve as transportation hubs and gathering points. By process of elimination, he could narrow down the possibilities. First, Purple Harbor, the largest seaport in Braavos, only allows local ships to dock. Its taverns and inns cater exclusively to locals unless someone particularly wealthy or powerful arrives. Given that the assassin had been at sea for more than 10 days, it was unlikely he would be found there. Thus, Purple Harbor was ruled out. The most likely place was Ragman's Harbor, adjacent to Purple Harbor, which specializes in receiving outsiders. Among the inns there was the Inn of the Green Eel. In the original story, Sam, Jon Snow's good friend, had once visited it, as had Arya Stark. The inn was known for its diversity, with foreigners speaking various languages. It seemed the perfect hiding spot for an assassin who had come to kill Viserys and his sister. Viserys chartered an inconspicuous boat with a silver moon coin to take him to the vicinity of Ragman's Harbor. He was determined to go straight to the Inn of the Green Eel. As a bustling commercial city, Braavos had no concept of a curfew. The docks were always active, with porters working night shifts to earn more. Upon arriving at the docks, Viserys observed a group of porters hauling cargo ships. They shouted in unison, straining against the weight in the dark waters. From a distance, they seemed to be swallowed by the Black Sea. Viserys stepped ashore to the sound of the waves lapping against the shore. Near Ragman's Harbor was a place called the Cattery. Despite its name, it was not a house for cats but a brothel with a feline theme. The employees wore fake cat ears and imitated the sounds of female cats mating calls to lure in passers-by. Their voices could make a man's bones melt. Viserys quickly rubbed his face and left the area, muttering, "Normal reaction, normal reaction." He took several deep breaths of the sea air to calm himself before entering the Inn of the Green Eel. The Inn of the Green Eel was the largest inn in the area, with a spacious interior. Each pillar was adorned with 2 or 3 candlesticks, and the inn used whale oil candles, making it exceptionally bright. Most areas were clearly visible, and 5 or 6 female waitresses served wine. Some guests, notably the rascals, pinched them on the buttocks, but the waitresses did not resist, knowing such guests gave more tips. Viserys surveyed the bustling inn, noting the diverse crowd of at least 100 people. The clientele was a mix of locals, Westerosi, and even 2 Dothraki with curved swords at their backs. Judging by their short braids, the Dothraki appeared to have lost more battles than they had won, indicating they were far from the fearsome warriors typically associated with their kind. Finding the assassin in such a crowd would be no easy task. Viserys noticed 3 main groups of people engaged in conversation, 1 speaking the common tongue and 2 speaking Valyrian. Dressed as a sailor with a brown turban, Viserys blended in well and did not attract much attention. He first approached the group speaking the common tongue. They were discussing the rebellion in the Iron Islands a few years ago, a topic unlikely to interest an assassin from Westeros. He then moved to the 2 groups speaking Valyrian, but they were engrossed in discussions about the upcoming 10-day celebration. Realizing the assassin would not be among those discussing local gossip, Viserys ordered a glass of wine and found a vantage point where he could observe the inn. He systematically evaluated the patrons, trying to identify anyone suspicious. 2 men dressed in flamboyant clothes, like roosters in a chicken coop, were clearly local water dancers and could be ruled out. Several vendors with large packages seemed equally unlikely to be assassins, given their demeanor and habits. Viserys quickly realized this method of identification was inefficient. A skilled assassin would be adept at camouflage. Deciding on a bolder approach, he chose to lure the snake out of its hole. Anyone showing an interest in the Beggar King would be highly suspicious. Viserys beckoned to a waitress, a girl of about 17. She had a slightly plumper figure than average and wore a knowing smile. Viserys took her hand, and though she pretended to pull away, he slipped her a handful of gold dragons. "Please buy everyone a drink," he said in a flirty tone. "Tell them it's a treat from the sailor Sinbad, who wants to hear stories about the Beggar King. The rest is yours." The waitress's heartbeat quickened at the sight of the little yellow treasures in her hand. She took another look at the sailor Sinbad, and found the facial features behind his beard quite handsome. Her resistance melted away. She nodded, slipping a gold dragon into her sleeve, and made her way to the bar. The innkeeper, a bald man in his 40s with a prominent double chin from years of indulgent drinking, lingered behind the bar. Seeing someone pay for a round of drinks brought a gleam to his eye. It meant higher turnover. He took out a golden-colored copper cup and tapped it with a spoon. Ding 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 ding, the spoon hitting the cup created a crisp sound, and the inn immediately fell silent as everyone turned their attention to the bar. The innkeeper pointed in Viserys' direction and announced, "Everyone, our sailor, Lord Sinbad, would like to offer everyone a drink. Let's raise our glasses to him. To Sinbad. To Sinbad." The patrons cheered. It was always good to drink for free, and they raised their glasses in the direction indicated by the innkeeper. Viserys nodded in acknowledgement. The innkeeper continued, "Lord Sinbad would like to know something about the Beggar King. I wonder if anyone can tell us about him." Chapter 30, Viserys' reputation. Ding ding. A similar sound of knocking came from somewhere in the inn. A young man, dressed decently, stood up. His cuffs were tight and neat, and his high, straight nose gave him an air of authority. "Everyone, I know a little about this Beggar King, Lord Sinbad," he said, raising his cup to Viserys before looking around the room to begin his story. The Beggar King, whose real name is Viserys Targaryen, is a descendant of the fallen royalty of Westeros. Many know this, and he is called the Beggar King because, almost a year ago, he sold his mother's crown and invited a group of sellswords to a banquet, hoping they would help him restore his kingdom. The young man paused for a moment, a hint of pride flashing in his eyes. The banquet was called the Banquet of the Crown, and I was lucky enough to be there. You see, sellswords are businessmen, and they didn't think that the poor Beggar King could fulfill his promise, so they laughed at him mercilessly. I remember the leader of the fist sellsword laughing at him, calling him a child looking for milk everywhere. He smiled at Viserys, who forced a polite smile in return. Viserys thought to himself, this is what it means to be a bully. Most people didn't know the details of that banquet, but now they do. Viserys chose to hold himself down except this unpleasant matter, but soon the sound of clinking glasses was heard again. A short, stocky man stood up. Due to his height, some spectators in the distance didn't even see him at first. His neck was so thick that it was almost the same size as his head. Ahem, Lord, what you said is all history. In fact, this Beggar King is actually quite capable, the short, stocky man said, standing on his tiptoes and waving at Viserys before beginning his tale. I don't know if you remember the Fierce Fish Company, but this Beggar King almost single-handedly wiped out the entire group. It was a few months ago, and the Beggar King had no money, so he used his sister as collateral. His sister was very beautiful, so the creditor agreed. But when the time came and he couldn't pay, the creditor sent someone to collect the debt and wanted to take his sister away by force. After that, the Beggar King killed them all. It was said that the situation was very tragic, and the blood that flowed out overflowed the alley. "My goodness," someone exclaimed. "How many people did he kill?" another asked. "Why wasn't he arrested?" yet another wondered. Compared to the initial ridicule, the public's opinion of Viserys had changed somewhat. They were shocked by his brutality and disgusted by his behavior of not paying his debts. Most of those disgusted were locals. However, the two Dothraki were quite excited, thinking that such a person was a true warrior. And that is why the Beggar King has earned the name, Fish-Eater of the Fierce. The burly man continued, then told the crowd about how Viserys had worked in the workshop as a laborer. This burly guy seemed to like using exaggerated expressions. He said that the gutter had turned red. Although it was exaggerated, the voices that despised Viserys for not paying his debts disappeared, replaced by amazement that Braavos had produced another fierce man. The two Dothraki were even more excited. They pounded their chests and let out strange roars, attracting the attention of the others. The first two people had already said everything they could say, and Viserys thanked everyone and then got up to leave. In fact, while the shortman was telling the story, Viserys had been observing the others out of the corner of his eye. He had noticed that because the two men were talking so vividly, he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He decided to hang around outside for a while. If the assassin was in the inn, he would probably follow him. If not, he would go to the next place. If the assassin understood the essence of reimbursement, he might have to go to the cattery. Viserys slowed down and walked down a small road with few people. After walking for half an hour without seeing anyone following him, he decided to go somewhere else. Just as Viserys was about to leave, an old woman wrapped in a grayish-blue shawl and hunched over appeared. At first glance, she looked like a giant prawn. As the old woman passed him, Viserys felt something was wrong but couldn't put his finger on it. Watching her disappear around the corner, Viserys finally realized what it was. It was the smell. An old woman shouldn't smell so strongly of the sea. He thought back to the dream he had had, in which the assassin seemed to have been caught in a storm and had been adrift at sea for days. He hurried after her, only to find that the old woman had disappeared. She really was up to something. Just as Viserys was scanning the surroundings, he suddenly felt a gust of wind. His body instinctively dodged, and a sharp dagger slashed past him, leaving a bright afterimage. It was the old woman from before. Now, she stood tall and straight, her disguise shed like a snake's skin. "Who are you? Why are you following me?" Viserys demanded, his voice steady, though he was on high alert. The assassin's features were obscured by shadows, and she spoke in a deliberately altered, hoarse voice. "What makes you think I'm following you? Did Robert send you?" Viserys asked, his eyes narrowing. "It must have been hard to be at sea for so many days, right?" The old woman's eyes widened in shock. How did he know about the storm? And the Zayline house ship? How did he track me here? This sudden insight into her recent struggles unnerved her, making her feel exposed and vulnerable. The assassin, sensing the danger of the situation, turned and fled with the agility of a black cat. Viserys, remaining calm, drew his crossbow and fired in the direction she fled. Whoosh, thud, a sound confirmed his hit. He approached cautiously and found the assassin lying motionless on the ground, as if paralyzed. The poison from the sea fish couldn't have worked this quickly. Viserys thought, flipping the assassin over just as she gulped something down. Realizing it was a poison pill, he swiftly punched her in the stomach, causing her to convulse and spit out a black, foul-smelling liquid. Seeing her suicide attempt thwarted, she tried to bite her tongue off, but the poison had already taken effect, weakening her jaw. Once assured she was no longer a threat, Viserys began to search her, his eyes widening in surprise. "A female assassin," he exclaimed. Chapter 31, Hellbow. "He's sick, master. We bought 1,250 gold dragons worth of whale oil. After distributing the amounts for the other brothers, we have a surplus of 842 gold dragons," the young accountant reported, diligently calculating the profits for Hellbow. A small mountain of gold dragons shimmered in the light of the whale oil candles. Hellbow, feeling particularly generous, grabbed a handful of gold dragons from the pile and slapped it in front of the young accountant. "It's yours." "Thank you, Master Hellbow. Thank you for your generosity." The young accountant was overwhelmed, his mind racing for words to further ingratiate himself with Hellbow. He couldn't help but think proudly that if Viserys had listened to him, they would have made even more profit. More importantly, he himself would have earned more. Because of Viserys' sudden defection, Helbo had only managed to take 200 pounds of whale oil instead of the 350 pounds he had originally planned. However, another candle workshop had offered an excellent price, even higher than his ideal. Helbo was in a very good mood, feeling like singing. He took a sip of wine, his eyes narrowing in pleasure. He had already decided to cut ties with Viserys. It was said that Dany's birthday was coming up soon. He planned to send a gift but not go himself. Viserys should understand what he meant. Just as Helbo was lost in his thoughts, a black object was thrown into his room through the window. When he looked closely, he realized it was a person. Helbo remained calm, but the young accountant turned pale. "Is someone after me? How dare they, with Viserys still on my side?" Helbo looked toward the window, his brain spinning with possibilities. But the next moment, a familiar figure jumped through the window. With silver hair, the identity of the person was unmistakable. "Lord Viserys, this." "An assassin, sent by the King of Whores," Viserys said calmly. The King of Whores referred, of course, to Robert, a VVIP of the King's Landing brothel. Thanks to his recent improvement in constitution, Viserys had been able to carry an 80 to 90 pounds man on his back and sneak into Helbo's home without making a sound. This guy had even set up 2 sentries near his own home. "There's a lot of space there, and there's Dany. It's not safe to take her back, so I'll let you keep her for now." "No, are you sick? You and your sister think it's unsafe, but I'm supposed to be fine." Helbo thought to himself, but dared not show it. He quickly put down his wine cup, grabbed the female assassin's ankles, and, together with Viserys, carried her out. "Go find some milk and bring it over," Viserys instructed the young accountant. Milk and other things could be used to dilute the toxins. He didn't want the assassin to die just yet. It would be best if he could make her vomit and contact Robert. This would buy him some time, at least until the end of the 10-day celebration. As long as Robert did not involve the faceless men, Viserys would be fine. However, with so many people attending the celebration, and if he participated in the sword competition, he might not be able to keep an eye on Dany. "There is no cow milk left. Will goat's milk do?" "Yes." Meanwhile, Viserys and Helbo carried the assassin to a dark room. It seemed that Helbo really yearned for the life of a noble, as it was said that nobles like to have underground dungeons and the like. This underground room was quite authentic. Inside, there was a wooden bed with mechanisms to restrict a person's movement, and some torture devices. However, upon closer inspection, these torture devices seemed to be more for fun. Threaded, convex, mace, what the hell are these? Viserys gave Helbo a meaningful look, causing him to blush. The two of them tied the female assassin to the bed in a big shape and then let out a sigh of relief. In the dim light, Viserys realized that the female assassin was actually quite good-looking. Her facial features were soft and gentle, not at all what one would expect from an assassin. "I'll leave first. Give her some more milk later, and then starve her for a few days." "Yes," Helbo replied indifferently. After Viserys left, Helbo took another look at the female assassin. He found her quite attractive, but she was still Viserys' prisoner, and he didn't dare to torture her. A few days later, when Viserys saw that his soap was almost dry, he asked Morel to arrange an introduction to Lady Phalia of the Moonshadow. Morel didn't object, as he had already agreed to facilitate the meeting. However, he understood that simply arranging an introduction didn't guarantee a meeting. To ensure things went smoothly, Morel bribed Phalia's maid to mention the matter to her mistress. The maid accepted the money but made no promises, her attitude reflecting Morel's. Agreeing to introduce them didn't mean they would actually meet, and taking money didn't mean the matter would be resolved. On this particular day, Phalia was hosting a gathering on her private ship. Every notable courtesan in Braavos had her own ship, where they entertained guests and conducted business. The most esteemed courtesans were protective of their reputations and would only offer their bodies in exchange for significant gifts or favors. An unspoken rule among courtesans was that the more a courtesan did for someone, the less likely they were to give themselves fully to them, though they would occasionally offer personal tokens to keep their admirers hopeful and loyal. Phalia, as one of the top courtesans, was well aware of these principles. But today, her client seemed particularly persistent. "Lady Moonshadow, please consider my proposal with mercy. I will never brag about it like those vain men," said the man in front of her. He had black hair, brown eyes, and a thin face, dressed in a blue shirt and purple bloomers of such fine quality that Phalia had to look away to avoid appearing too interested. The man, however, kept his gaze fixed on Phalia. Her thin but well-proportioned shoulders, half-exposed breasts smoother than whale blubber, and seductive curves tapering to a slender waist all captivated him. As his eyes traveled further down, they took in the sudden fullness of her hips, which made him feel parched with desire. Master Daxon, thank you for your kindness, but I can still maintain the workshop for the time being, Phalia replied, her voice steady. Daxon laughed, a hint of desperation in his eyes. Don't be ridiculous. Cooper has already cut the price to half of what it was last year. There's no profit to be made. I've heard that the workshop in Greenwater Town has lost many skilled workers. The candles they make are not only of poor quality, but also more expensive. Why bother going on? Please, give me your heart. I would be happy to die for it, let alone that workshop, he said, his words growing more explicit as he leaned forward like a hungry jackal, poised to pounce at any moment. Chapter 32, Entrapment. Calling out loudly for help is behavior deemed inappropriate for such a social interaction. It implies an inability to control the situation, signaling incompetence. As the young man in front of her slowly approached, Phalia felt her blood rushing to her ears. Was she going to suffer a loss today? Ahem. Just as the young man was licking his lips and closing in, a light cough interrupted his next move. Phalia let out a sigh of relief. Lady Phalia, our meeting time is almost over today, came the voice of Asha, Phalia's maid. The young man paused, his heart filled with resentment, but he dared not make any further moves. Causing a scene could bring trouble to his house unless the other party was willing to submit. Beauty is not a sin. I apologize for my rudeness. I am truly sorry. Please forgive me, Lady Phalia. Phalia calmed herself and responded softly, you are too kind. In a certain light, this is also my honor. She breathed heavily after the young man left her cabin. These professional courtesans were just ordinary girls. They might be outstanding in appearance and temperament, but they lacked the means to protect themselves. Asha entered, her dark almond-shaped eyes full of worry. Lady Phalia, are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. Asha, with her Dothraki blood, almond-shaped eyes, and long braids, looked wilder than the ordinary Braavos girls. Her body had more impressive curves, and if anything serious happened, she would have to stand up for her master. For instance, if the noble young man hadn't relented, Asha might have had to offer herself to appease him. Fortunately, they had escaped unscathed. After the master and servant had calmed down, Asha tentatively said, Lady, Morel would like to introduce you to someone. His name is Viserys Targaryen. Despite the unsettling encounter, business had to go on. Viserys. Phalia couldn't immediately recall Viserys' identity. The Beggar King. As Phalia's personal maid, Asha knew a little about the important people in Braavos and even the free cities. Even she knew about someone like the original Viserys. What does he want with me? After the maid's reminder, Phalia remembered who the Beggar King was. But she couldn't understand why Viserys was seeking her out. She didn't have an army, and although she had a few swordsmen, they were merely her bodyguards. He said he wanted to talk to you about a good business opportunity. I thought he was going to ask for something else, Phalia thought to herself. It seemed the Beggar King wasn't aiming to restore his kingdom but to amass a fortune first. She was wary of getting entangled with the descendants of a fallen kingdom. Viserys was constantly under threat of assassination, and any association with him could make her a target, especially if Robert suspected she and Viserys shared some untold secret. Phalia preferred to avoid the so-called good business. Just as she was about to refuse outright, she reconsidered. Such a direct refusal might not be appropriate, especially since Viserys had met the Sea Lord. No matter her status, it couldn't surpass that of the Sea Lord. Phalia thought for a moment and said, just say that I'm not feeling well and it's inconvenient. If there's anything important, Ranch can handle it. Ranch was Phalia's housekeeper and manager. Understood, Asha replied and left the cabin, leaving Phalia alone. Reflecting on her situation, Phalia realized she might have fallen into a conspiracy. The winner of the 10-day celebration beauty pageant would not only gain a title and a reward but also have the chance to elevate their status. They would get the opportunity to enter the high walls of Braavos' three great houses, potentially merging their lives and bloodlines with them. Even if they failed to achieve this ultimate goal, as winners of the triennial beauty pageant, they would become a symbol of Braavos, the bastard daughter of Valyria. They might even enter diplomatic circles, gaining influence far beyond their current reach. This was the dream of every socialite. But to become the champion, or even to participate in the beauty pageant, there was a stringent prerequisite: virginity. Braavos might be Valyria's bastard daughter, but it wasn't Valyria's little whore. The requirements for participation were exceedingly strict. But now Phalia faced another pressing problem. If she couldn't keep Morel's workshop running, she might fall behind in promotion by the time the 10-day festival arrived. If her workshop turned into a theater, it would be a serious blow to her reputation as Moonshadow. She was in a dilemma. If she committed to the young man, she might lose her chance to participate in the beauty contest. On the other hand, her life would be in his hands. Even if she managed to enter the competition by other means, she would be vulnerable to his future demands, which she might be reluctant to accept. On the other hand, if she chose to remain chaste, she would be at a great disadvantage and likely to lose. According to an unwritten rule, once a courtesan wins a competition, she tends to ruthlessly suppress her former rivals. The best Phalia could hope for in such a scenario would be to escape Braavos. However, for a maiden of 16 or 17, leaving Braavos meant becoming vulnerable and losing all her influence and security. She suddenly empathized with the situation of Viserys and his sister. She now had two formidable opponents, the Poetess and the Nightingale. The Nightingale had already announced plans to build a new theater in Greenwater Town, making it clear who was behind her predicament. "We must save the workshop," Phalia resolved. She decided to instruct Ranch to contact Morel again to assess the workshop's situation. If it was truly dire, she would have to intervene to save it. Despite the seemingly luxurious lifestyle of a courtesan, maintaining such a life required considerable expenses. Maids, servants, and numerous relatives depended on her for their livelihood. Phalia might even have to consider selling some of her property or jewelry to keep the workshop running. However, she had no idea how badly Morel's workshop was losing money. Chapter 33, Damn, it's a scam. Brother Viserys was in a good mood today and personally cooked a dish of shredded chicken for Dany. Since moving, Dany had rarely tasted Viserys' cooking. The reason was that Morel had told him that Phalia had agreed to meet with him at the Moonpool Theater near Purple Harbor. The siblings ate heartily, their fingers gleaming with oil, which made the maid on the side jealous. At the same time, she felt a bit ashamed that her cooking wasn't as good as her employer's. After they had finished eating, the maid brought a basin of water for washing their hands. Dany was about to wash her hands when Viserys stopped her. "Wait a minute." Dany watched as Viserys mysteriously took out a round object. It was oval-shaped and more like a goose egg, with a light purple color. When she took it from Viserys' hands, she found it to be delicate and smooth, with a faint scent of gardenia. "Wet it and rub it like this." Following Viserys' demonstration, Dany became the first person in the world to wash her hands with modern soap. How was it? Was it clean enough? Dany looked at her hands in a daze and found that there was indeed no oil residue. In the past, even if she washed her hands with water for a long time, they would still be sticky after a while. But after washing them with this thing, not only did her hands not stick, but they also had a faint fragrance. The maid next to her also stared at the bubbles in the water with curiosity. "This thing is called..." "Damn, there's no word I know for soap in Valyrian." Viserys paused for a moment, then told her that it was soap. Dany remembered the day when Viserys excitedly told her, "We're going to have dragon eggs." But what did this have to do with dragon eggs? "Brother, are you going to sell this?" "Yes, and no." Dany's face showed confusion. You don't need to worry about it. Just wait for my good news." After dinner, Viserys took a carriage directly to the nearby port and then boarded a boat to Purple Harbor. As he approached Purple Harbor, he could see the distant purple beach, resembling fields of lavender growing by the sea. In reality, it wasn't lavender but crushed snail shells drying in the sun. When the first refugees discovered Braavos, they quickly took advantage of its specialty, a purple snail. Braavos was developed by the pigment trade, and Viserys' soap was made with this pigment. Soon, he arrived at the Moonpool Theater. As he disembarked, he noticed the distant Sea Lord's palace. When Viserys first arrived in Braavos, he was received by the Sea Lord, who even became his witness not long after. However, now he no longer had the qualifications to meet with the Sea Lord. He thought, as long as this soap business succeeds, I can start acquiring dragon eggs. In the original story, Dany hatched 3 eggs, obtaining 3 dragons. It was these 3 dragons that earned her the title, Mother of Dragons. Now there are more than 4 years until the so-called Bleeding Star. If I can collect 8 or 10 eggs, Dany can hatch them and raise them. Then, in a few years, when the dragons are grown, I will return to Westeros and get revenge on those rebels. Viserys thought excitedly, already envisioning himself riding a dragon through the sky. I haven't ridden a dragon before. If I haven't ridden a dragon even after I transmigrated, then I would have wasted my time, he mused. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the Moonpool Theater. As the saying goes, the Purple Harbor area is full of powerful people, and many wore black or white clothing. Not long after Viserys got off the carriage, a servant in reddish-brown shorts and a yellow vest ran up to him. "Is it Lord Viserys? Lady Phalia is waiting for you. Please follow me." They walked on a smooth stone slab road and stepped onto a soft carpet. The servant led Viserys to the door of a box. "Lady Phalia is waiting for you inside," said the servant, opening the purple lacquered door for him. Viserys felt a mix of excitement and curiosity, eager to see what the famous Moonshadow Phalia looked like. In his opinion, these courtesans were somewhat like the courtesans of ancient times in his world. Many protagonists in novels had collections of courtesans, and he wondered if he might have the opportunity as well. Calming his emotions, Viserys entered the room. However, what he saw was a young man in his late 20s with jet black, slightly curly hair, meticulously combed. His azure velvet shirt was perfectly ironed. The man exuded a smart and capable aura, with his entire body appearing almost mannequin-like in its definition. "Ah! I thought I was meeting Lady Phalia." Viserys thought he had gone the wrong way and looked at the waiter with a questioning glance, silently asking how he could have led him so astray. Before the waiter could respond, the man with black hair spoke up, "Lord Viserys." Viserys hesitated but then understood. He softened his expression, walked back into the room, and sat down in front of the young man. "I am here to meet you in place of Lady Phalia." "You can say what you want to say now," the young man said calmly. Viserys glanced out the window. He knew when to lose his temper and when to hold it in. He needed Phalia's name to enter the competition at the 10-day celebration and win the dragon egg. He also needed her help to sell the soap. Since he was asking for something, he would hold back for a while and wait until the other party realized the value of what he had before he put on airs. However, he couldn't be too low-key. Viserys took out 3 egg-shaped soaps from his bag, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 purple. The young man looked at the objects with wide eyes, clearly intrigued. "First of all, I want to say that I don't need money, and secondly, I'm the only one who can make these things. The raw materials for these come from whale oil and can save Morel's workshop," Viserys explained. He then picked up a pastry from the table that was covered in grease and squeezed it, getting his hands covered in oil. Although the young man didn't know what he was going to do, he maintained a calm demeanor. Viserys picked up one of the soaps and wet his hands with the teapot next to him. As he rubbed his hands together, a lot of white foam appeared. After rinsing his hands, Viserys got up and showed his clean hands to the young man. "I hope the price of this soap is 20 silver moons. You can take it back to show it to Lady Moonshadow," Viserys said. He then walked to the door of the room. "If Lady Moonshadow doesn't mind, I'd like to see Lady Nightingale and Lady Poetess as well, so I hope you can give me an answer soon." With that, he closed the door and left. He still had to see how the female assassin was doing today. The woman held the secret of the Skin Changers Chapter 34, bet, damn it. It was a fraud. Viserys muttered angrily as he left the theater, but he quickly regained his composure. He believed that Phalia knew what she was doing. Once she used the soap, it would become a necessity in her life. Viserys felt a tinge of pride, convinced that she would fall in love with the soap after trying it. Currently, the cost of producing a piece of soap was only 1 or 2 Bravos iron coins. If he sold it for 20 silver moons, his profit margin would be an astonishing 7,000%. Suddenly, a chill ran down Viserys' neck as he thought of something. Initially, the soap would be marketed to the upper class, the nobles. These wealthy individuals consumed rich foods daily, which would lead to oily skin. However, his soap was strong enough to dry out their faces after just 1 use. The more they used it, the oilier their faces would become, prompting them to buy more. It would create a virtuous cycle. Viserys didn't plan to exploit the poor. When the soap became more popular, it would eventually benefit the lower class as well. His mood lifted at the thought. It had been 5 or 6 days since Viserys had subdued the female assassin. Feeling that the time was right, he decided to check on her. By this time, Helbo had heard about Viserys' meeting with Phalia. Initially surprised, he was also somewhat relieved. It seemed that the Morel and Phalia were close allies. Fortunately, he had not pushed his plan too far. When Helbo learned that Viserys had gone to the Moonpool Theater, he chuckled to himself. After all his years in Bravos, he knew the rules for courtesans meeting in private. They never left their ships, only coming ashore for public events. In his opinion, Phalia would likely not appreciate Viserys' good intentions. That was fine by Helbo. Once the reckless young man had calmed down, he would be easier to manipulate. Imagine that, controlling a prince, a nobleman. Helbo couldn't help but fantasize. Just then, a servant announced that Viserys was visiting. Helbo hurried over to greet him, partly out of curiosity and partly hoping that Viserys would be taken away by Phalia. Living under the same roof as an assassin every day was unnerving. The assassin, who had not eaten for 5 or 6 days, had visibly sunken cheeks. To make it easier to feed her, Helbo had put a small device in her mouth. Viserys immediately recognized the device, and after a moment he realized what it was. "Where did you get the gag?" he asked. "Gag? What a great name." Helbo looked at Viserys, somewhat surprised, as if he had met a kindred spirit. The female assassin had no idea what they were talking about, she just hoped to be released as soon as possible. She saw her target take the candle from the slightly overweight man and hold it up to her face. Confirming the look, it was indeed the person she was supposed to kill. But now she couldn't even kill herself, let alone someone else. Over the past few days, she had seen the torture instruments around her and realized they would be used on her sooner or later. However, to her surprise, the young man did not act as she expected. Instead, he fed her some sweet soup. "Ah. It's so sweet," the assassin sighed in her heart. At the same time, she discovered that her body seemed to be regaining some feeling. For a moment, it felt as if her brain, covered with rusty gears, had been lubricated and her thoughts began to turn again. What does he want, she wondered. The young man in front of her slowly said, "We are all pitiful people." The female assassin didn't expect him to say that. Although she couldn't speak, she thought to herself, pitiful. You were born a prince, and even in a foreign land, you would still be taken care of. You are pitiful. Then everyone is pitiful. Viserys continued, "Do you think I'm talking nonsense? In fact, I've seen everything about you." He began to recount the story he had seen in his dream. The ship you were on encountered a storm in the narrow sea. You were alone at sea for more than 10 days, surviving only on fish and shrimp. Helbo raised his eyebrows, thinking to himself that this assassin was no ordinary person, being able to survive at sea for more than 10 days. But he wondered why Viserys knew so much. "Since I arrived in Bravos at the age of 8, Robert has sent at least 7 or 8 assassins to kill me every year, but I have survived them all. Do you know why? Or don't you think it's amazing that I was only 8 years old at the time, with a baby sister in my arms, and yet I was able to survive Robert's assassins time and time again?" Neither the female assassin nor Helbo believed Viserys' story. However, Helbo knew that the Viserys siblings had indeed wandered alone for several years, and it was not easy to survive so many assassination attempts. The female assassin thought Viserys was just showing off, but the question still lingered in her mind, how did he know she had been shipwrecked? How did he know so much about her? Viserys then gave a very mystical answer. He leaned his face close to the female assassin, and the two could almost feel each other's breath. "Because the gods are warning me," he said. The female assassin narrowed her eyes, obviously not believing him. "We can make a bet. I'll let you go today, and you can go anywhere you want to start preparing again. But the result will still be failure. For 10 days, if you lose, you'll have to follow me. What do you say? Are you in or out?" Viserys' voice had a certain seductive power, like the whisper of a devil. This offer left Helbo beside him dumbfounded. "No, you're seriously ill. How could you dare to let go of the assassin who tried to kill you? What's the point?" he thought. The female assassin didn't hesitate for a second, staring at Viserys with eyes that seemed to be challenging him. Viserys removed her gag and freed her limbs, smiling as he said, "You're free." When he actually let her go, the female assassin's face showed disbelief. Helbo, who was behind Viserys, leaned against the corner of the wall in case she tried to make a move. She walked slowly towards the door, looking back at Viserys hesitantly. "I let you leave, but on one condition: you tried to kill me. But not only did I not kill you, I also saved you. So you owe me 2 lives, I don't need you to repay them. You just can't hurt Dany." Viserys stared into her eyes and said in a firm voice. This seemed risky, but in fact, the risk was not that high. Since his dragon dreams had advanced to the proficient level, he could predict danger even earlier. He could also use dragon dreams to locate her. "How can I lose you with a mystical map?" he thought. If he could subdue this assassin, not only would he be able to participate in the celebration without any worries 2 months later, but most importantly, he would be able to get the skin changer's secrets from her. This may allow him to control multiple dragons at the same time after they hatched, preventing the dragon sons from becoming rebellious. "I swear by the gods that I will not harm your sister before I kill you," the female assassin said in common tongue. This was the first thing she had said since she was captured. As he watched the female assassin leave, Helbo realized that the person standing in front of him was not an ordinary fool. He was a complete lunatic. He suddenly remembered a rumor about the Targaryens. Targaryen, they are either mad or great. Chapter 35, Phalia's boat. When Viserys finished his meeting with the assassin, it had already grown dark. As he made his way home, the stars had appeared in the sky. Upon arriving, he noticed an unfamiliar carriage parked in front of his house. The carriage was adorned with a faint moon emblem, indicating it was a private and exquisite vehicle. The grand nature of the visit suggested it wasn't malicious. Two figures stood next to the carriage, one was the maid Viserys had hired, and the other seemed familiar. Before he could take 2 steps, the familiar figure approached him. It was Ranch, the young man he had met at the Moonpool Theater. This time, Ranch's expression was noticeably friendlier and warmer, likely due to Viserys' meeting with Phalia, the Moonshadow. Ranch walked forward, bowed slightly to Viserys, and said, "Prince Viserys, Lady Moonshadow has asked to meet you and hopes to speak with you." This time, Ranch was exceedingly courteous, trying to satisfy Viserys. The reason was that Phalia already knew about the dire situation at the Morel workshop. It was beyond saving, even with an infusion of 10,000 gold dragons. She had placed all her hopes on Viserys, having recognized the value of his soap immediately. Viserys was her last straw. Viserys sensed the change in attitude and understood the urgency. Lady Moonshadow's immediate request for a meeting indicated the importance of the soap to her. He wanted to leverage this to gain more influence in their dealings. If the soap wasn't crucial, she wouldn't have sought him out so urgently, even at night. "If it's about the soap, please leave. I already have a better partner to work with," Viserys said, trying to test her resolve and willingness to negotiate. Viserys knew that her interest in the soap was a significant opportunity. He wanted to see how desperate she was. He had a backup plan. If things didn't work out, he could sell the formula to the Iron Bank and secure some money. However, he hoped it wouldn't come to that. After all, who would kill a hen that lays golden eggs? Fortunately, Viserys' gamble paid off. As soon as he crossed the threshold of his house, he could already sense the urgency in Ranch's demeanor. "Lord Viserys," Ranch hurriedly stood in front of him, "you said you had a new partner, but why don't you come with me to see what Lady Moonshadow can offer?" Ranch's intuition told him that Viserys was bluffing, but he didn't dare to gamble. The Morel workshop was too important to Phalia, and he knew what losing it would mean for her. "Then let's hurry up," Viserys replied. "Okay. Please get in the carriage," Ranch responded. The carriage was filled with a faint aroma, and the seats were adorned with soft velvet pillows, almost like a sofa. As Viserys settled in, he couldn't help but appreciate the comfort, indicating that Phalia usually rode in this carriage herself. After about 10 minutes, they arrived at a dock. Viserys thought he would have to disembark and transfer, but to his surprise, Ranch drove the carriage directly onto a boat. Once they arrived at the next port, Ranch simply drove off the boat and continued on their way. So extravagant. Viserys thought, realizing that he didn't even have a personal carriage. He sighed at the opulence. After another half-hour or so, they reached a small lake. Several boats floated on the lake, resembling junk boats but decorated in a style unique to this world. Lanterns hung from the boats, making them easy to spot in the dark. "Lord Viserys, we've arrived," Ranch announced. Viserys got off the carriage and took in the serene night. The crescent moon above looked like a small boat hanging in a black velvet sky, dotted with a few stars. Not seeing the familiar Big Dipper, Viserys was reminded that he was no longer in his original world. A moment of sadness washed over him, realizing he might never return. He quickly gathered himself and followed Ranch to the lake, where a small barge awaited. The boatman turned out to be a robust woman. As Viserys and Ranch boarded the boat, ripples spread out from the bottom, distorting the reflection of the crescent moon as they slowly sailed towards one of the boats. Halfway through the journey, a figure emerged from the boat they were approaching. She was less than 1.6 meters tall but had an explosive figure. Even in the dim light, her silhouette was captivating. When they reached the side of the boat, Ranch made a gesture of invitation, indicating he would not be joining them. Viserys then saw the true face of the figure. She had spirited almond-shaped eyes and well-defined features. Her figure was undoubtedly an asset. However, Viserys knew from her attire that she was not Phalia. "Still," he said, "this is Lady Moonshadow. It is an honor to meet you." The maid was momentarily stunned but quickly responded, "Lady Moonshadow's maid. She is waiting for you inside." "Sorry, my mistake," Viserys replied. At this moment, Asha clearly saw Viserys' appearance under the moonlight and couldn't help but feel a good impression. To Asha, such handsome boys were not common. Coupled with the amusing misunderstanding earlier, her heart softened. However, when she noticed Ranch's gesture on the boat, her expression grew more serious. Viserys, unaware of this, was preoccupied with what to say during the meeting. His earlier behavior was strategic, based on the saying, "It's easier to face the known danger than to deal with the unseen threat." If he could get along with Phalia's associates, it would make future dealings with her much smoother. Asha lifted the curtain for Viserys, and as soon as he entered, he was greeted by a scent similar to that in the carriage. He passed through a small door and found himself in what looked like a small living room. In front of him was a table with a few exquisite chairs on either side. A woman wearing a moon-white cloak sat behind the table, her veil concealing her face. She looked towards the door as he entered. At that moment, 3 crisp bells rang outside the boat, and Phalia's eyes flickered twice, once for the silver bells outside and once for Viserys' appearance. However, Viserys now felt slightly irritated. This woman was blocking his view entirely. Her figure was hidden by the cloak, and her face was covered by a veil. How ridiculous! But he reminded himself that the purpose of today's meeting was to discuss business and cooperation. If she didn't want to show her face, it wasn't necessary. Phalia made a gesture of invitation, indicating that he should take a seat. Viserys sat down with ease and said, "I don't know what cooperation plan Lady Phalia has, so please, tell me directly."